Chapter 141. So this is Professor Snape. Lockhart's ripped shirt clung to the polished stone of the platform like a trampled garland. The students around the long table reacted instantly. A little witch with pigtails covered her mouth. Her voice snapped like a frayed string. "My Merlin, Hawkwood killed someone." At the sound, some of the quieter students hid their faces. Others, boys with flushed, excited faces, crowded together, whispering eagerly. "Look, the professor who supposedly beat a troll was taken down by Dylan with one spell." "Haha, I didn't believe it before, but Dylan really took care of a troll himself." "Right, even if not many saw it, the professors all acknowledged it." This professor who does nothing in class, how did he even get his books published? The jeers and pointing came mostly from the Gryffindors. A Hufflepuff boy looked distressed. A round-faced first-year stepped forward, worried. "Someone get the nurse! He's bleeding so badly!" Hermione's face was drawn. "He isn't going to die, is he?" Ron shrugged. "Who cares?" Lockhart lay on the floor, hot blood soaking the tile, lips trembling. He dared not move for fear that any sudden motion would make things worse. His muffled cries were almost lost in the general clamor. Dylan frowned. He thought it was time to help. He took a step forward, wand half raised. Professor Snape swept across the platform in a cloud of black robes. His face was as cold as ever, but Dylan, who'd been in Snape's classes for a year now, noticed an odd, almost pleased look in his expression. Snape's thin mouth curled subtly. When it landed on Lockhart's crouched, babbling form, the curl turned to disgust. "Oh, the famous Lockhart," Snape said through clenched teeth, voice low enough that the students closest could only barely hear. "You who claimed that if you were the same year as me, perhaps Potter's wife would be yours, that the chosen one would be your child." He cut off, jaw working, then continued in a tone that left no doubt it was rhetorical. "It seems you don't even command the admiration of the young wizards around you now." As he spoke, he wove a spell to keep his words private. Dylan, unfortunately, was close enough to lip-read what Snape was saying. The barely audible tirade made him snort inwardly. Snape hated everyone, Dylan knew, but he rarely acted on his dislike. Lockhart was one of the few who actually made him lose his temper. Snape didn't wait for any response. He grasped Lockhart roughly by the hair and hauled his head up as if handling a dead pig, then leveled his wand at Lockhart's blood-slicked torso. His lips moved fast as he intoned the counter-curse to Sectum Sempra. "Vulnera Senentur, Vulnera Senentur." His voice was low and firm, and the air around the wand thrummed with the power of the spell. As Snape traced a steady pattern above the ragged wound, Lockhart's flayed flesh began to draw back together. The bleeding slowed. Scattered droplets of blood crept along as if compelled, forming a thin red stream that encircled them and fed back into the wound. Slowly, the lacerations closed until there was no sign of injury at all. No scar, no blood. Sectum Sempra was a vicious spell, but it had a counter. If the counterspell was known and fast enough, the damage could be erased. That was why Snape's creatorship of Sectum Sempra had never truly damned him in the eyes of the school. Mastery of the antidote made it a practical, if brutal, dueling technique. Dylan thought, darkly amused, that if Sectum Sempra lacked a counter, it might as well be a minor unforgivable. Bleeding someone to death sounded horrifying. Lockhart's face gradually regained its color. His injuries had vanished, his robes had not. He sat up, dazed and suddenly very embarrassed. His torn clothes did nothing to hide the soft roll of his belly. His pale skin looked like meat left too long in cold water. He scrambled to his feet and clutched at what was left of his shirt, pinching the fabric together to preserve a shred of dignity. Snape glanced down at him. Lockhart shrank back as if expecting another lash of ridicule. He couldn't fathom why Snape was so hostile. Had Snape really been aiming at him? And what did he mean about Potter's wife? Lockhart's thoughts remained self-centered and unrefined. Snape's voice carried across the great hall, amplified by a sonorous charm so that every ear heard him plainly. "Hawkwood, you dare severely injure a professor in a staged duel. I will be giving you detention." Dylan nearly choked. How was he the one being punished? He had been permitted to duel. Hadn't Snape allowed it? He felt like the very fabric of authority was being mismanaged. Lockhart snapped into performance mode. Clutching his chest, he shuffled forward and struck a pose of suffering that was more theatrical than pitiful. "Wait, No, it wasn't severe at all. Mr. Hawkwood didn't mean to. This was a demonstration. To build the children's confidence, I don't mind paying a little price, my dignity. He recovered with practiced ease, gesturing grandly. I could have stopped him. I could have neutralized his spell with a single motion, but I wanted the students to see how one recovers, to learn courage in the face of danger. Mr. Hawkwood has given an exemplary display. Some of the younger students, who had been aghast, exchanged looks of sudden understanding. Fred and George, elbowing through the throng, secretly retrieved Lockhart's discarded pink robe. The twins grinned at each other, eyes glittering, mischief danced in their expressions. Snape watched Lockhart's patter with a faint, sour twitch at the corner of his mouth, an expression that might once have been amusement but was now unmistakably malice. Dylan felt the urge to do something petty in reply. He glanced down, imagining the worst, but steadied himself. He would stand with Snape, whatever else happened. Lockhart bowed his head into a beatific smile, pressing on. That's enough of a demonstration for now. It's getting late. We'll move on. Mr. Hawkwood, please step down. Your performance was excellent, and I hope my guidance has been of some help. He turned to the students. Gather close. I'll split you into 2 groups for preliminary dueling practice. Professor Snape, would you assist me in dividing them? Of course, Snape said. Dylan climbed down from the platform and drifted toward Neville, who stood wide-eyed and flushed at his side. And soon the great hall buzzed anew, part astonishment, part amusement, as Lockhart rearranged the scene into a lesson, and Snape, by his cold presence, kept enough order for the exercise to begin. Chapter 1. Coming from a non-magical world into a magical one, the prospect of making real progress in magic excited him more than idle socializing ever could. He did not aim to become the kind of person who sacrificed everything for power. Not Voldemort, not Grindelwald, though he recognized individuals like Grindelwald needed emotional support just the same. Mostly, Dylan liked solitude. It let him focus, and he was content. Still, sometimes he wanted someone to talk to. A normal conversation, nothing more. Dylan casually helped Neville through some basic counter movements and disarming techniques. Professor Snape watched silently from the dice while Lockhart flitted among the students, hands in robes always theatrically busy. Oh, my goodness, don't panic. Press the wound. Use a healing charm. Yes, manage it yourselves. I told you, no other spells. Lockhart wailed whenever anyone took more than a scratch. He'd banged the drum of caution all morning, and now an injury, however minor, became a theatrical catastrophe in his hands. Meanwhile, the duel between Harry and Malfoy had become the most intense display of the lot. With Snape watching them from the front, there were some dangerous spells thrown, but nothing irredeemably bad happened. After sending someone with a bleeding nose to patch themselves up, Lockhart hopped back up onto the stage. I think I really should teach you how to defend against those horrible spells properly, he announced, looking for volunteers. He began to gesture at students, eyes landing on Hermione and someone else. Miss Granger, Miss Bulstrode. Oh, Snape cut him off with a look and a voice like ice. Not girls. Potter and Malfoy will do the demonstration. Relief washed over Lockhart's face. Excellent. Potter, Malfoy, up here please. Everyone, give them space. Lockhart leaned toward Harry and whispered theatrically. Watch closely. When Draco points his wand, do this! He straightened and, for once, looked almost presentable. But as he lifted his arm to make an ornate gesture, the wand slipped from his hand and clattered to the stage. Snape watched him stoop for it with undisguised contempt. Ahem, perhaps that spell I tried earlier made my wand too excited, Lockhart said, forcing a smile. Now, Harry, remember my movement. You mean the movement where you threw your own wand away? Harry asked, baffled. Lockhart waved him off and started the demonstration despite the awkwardness. Malfoy immediately raised his wand. Serpensortia! A dark flash sent a large black snake spilling from Malfoy's wand to the boards. It slithered toward Harry, hissing hungrily. Professor, you're supposed to be demonstrating. What should I do? Harry asked. Lockhart stepped forward with bluster. I'll handle it. He fired off a spell at the snake, and instead of subduing it, he drew its ire. The snake sprang up, looping viciously around Lockhart's neck. Lockhart began to choke, coughing and waving his arms, terrified. Snape frowned, ready to intervene. Harry leaned in toward the creature and hissed under his breath. The snake stilled, Its head turned to listen, and then it loosened its coils and slid down Lockhart's chest. Dylan's eyes narrowed. He knew from a recent trip into the Forbidden Forest, where he'd captured and refined a snake's living soul, that he could understand the language of ordinary snakes. The sound Harry made was parseltongue, a hissing speech the snake clearly understood. Dylan rubbed his wand between his fingers, and a thought flashed through him. Harry's living soul would be exceptionally valuable for research. With soul bob tongue, the technique of refining a living soul so you could understand a creature's language, Dylan had already seen how refining the soul of a species let him comprehend its tongue. If he refined Harry's living soul directly, might he inherit or replicate parseltongue? The idea was dangerous and bold. He chuckled inwardly and dismissed the impulse. Using soul bob tongue on a living person was an intimacy and a violation he would hesitate to cross. Unless that person were dead, killed by his own killing curse, extracting a living soul carried a moral weight he did not take lightly. And Harry was, by current measure, a friend. He would not subject a friend to that. Still, the thought persisted. What if he could research a counterspell to the unforgivable curses, make them no longer unforgivable? If such research succeeded, he could justify a lot. As a good friend, offering up your living soul voluntarily to aid a friend's work, helping science, protecting others, might seem reasonable. Chapter 143. Give the professor a memory box so he can recall the night he held Lily's body. After Harry demonstrated his ability to speak parseltongue, the atmosphere in the duel club shifted. What had been an eager room full of duelists turned into a murmur of speculation. Small groups clustered together, whispering, could Harry, who could speak to snakes, be the heir of Slytherin? At first I thought it might be Malfoy, one boy muttered. Can you imagine the heir being from Gryffindor? Another asked. Prophecies don't say the heir has to be in Slytherin, a third pointed out. Still, if Potter is the heir, how could a Gryffindor open the Chamber of Secrets and unleash that monster to attack half-bloods? Why not? Gryffindors don't spend all their time studying. Most of them are after something dramatic. That actually makes sense. Clusters of students debated in low tones throughout the Great Hall. Everyone wanted to know, was Harry the heir? Had he opened the chamber? Was he somehow controlling the monster? Nobody paid attention to Lockhart anymore. He flitted through the crowd, smiling, shaking hands, desperate to draw their eyes back to the Duel Club founder. Tonight, he should have been the star. But the Chamber of Secrets and the possibility of a monster in the school drowned out any interest in his celebrity. Even his fans ignored him. After all, when your life could be in danger, you don't care about the latest young wizard book. Hermione pulled a distressed Harry away from the crowd, and he left with Ron. Dylan, having seen enough for the evening, headed for the side door and approached Professor Snape. Professor, this lot doesn't need us to stick around, Dylan said. Shall we go? Snape barely looked at him. He inclined his head and walked toward the corridor without a word. Dylan followed. Once they were out of earshot, Snape spoke. Your friend is a parseltongue, he said. You don't seem surprised. Dylan blinked. What's there to be surprised about? Snape's gaze narrowed. Almost every known parseltongue has Slytherin blood. Potter has the ability. That will bring him trouble. Dylan nodded. A lot of trouble. He knew why Harry could speak parseltongue. It wasn't Slytherin descent, but the remnant of Lord Voldemort's soul inside him. If that fragment were destroyed, Harry's parseltongue should disappear. In theory, Dylan could try to extract Voldemort's fragment and devour it to gain the skill himself, but because the fragment had fused with Harry's soul like a Horcrux, it couldn't be easily separated. Snape watched Dylan's casual acceptance with a touch of surprise. You don't seem to care whether Potter might be the heir, Snape said. Aren't you worried? Dylan's eyes flashed. If he were the heir, he could control the monster in the chamber, wouldn't he? I could study it. I'm running into a few transfiguration bottlenecks. Creatures would be useful. Snape's mouth twitched. He loved to belittle Harry whenever possible, every chance, any place. They spoke for a few minutes more, both slipping into the mental discipline of occlumency as a matter of habit. Neither allowed the other any emotional access. Before they parted, Snape warned, Curfew's nearly on. If you don't want points docked from Gryffindor, be in your dormitory, and stay inside tonight. I don't want to see you out." Dylan watched the black cloak billow away and rubbed his chin. Had Snape caught him sneaking into the Forbidden Forest? He had been careful, Shadow Ring and Coalball's teleportation, and it didn't make sense. Maybe Snape's warning was simply practical. There was a dangerous creature on the loose. Dylan smiled to himself. Snape never said what he meant directly. Walking back to the Gryffindor common room, Dylan's thoughts turned to Snape's upcoming birthday. Christmas was near, and Snape's birthday followed soon after. He'd already given Snape a robe once. What to give this time? A memory bottle with 3 chambers, he decided. The first chamber would contain the scent of beech and sunlight soapberry, the smell of the Muggle shampoo Lily once received for her 14th. The second would carry cellar moss, damp and cool. The third would contain absinthe. Put together, the top notes, sweet, astringent beech, and the chill of moss, might recreate the musty, decaying leaf smell and the faint perfume of hair Snape had noticed when he'd held Lily's corpse. The absinthe might not directly recreate the wedding bouquet and potion tang Snape saw in Harry's eyes before Lily's death, but it would nudge something else. For the base note, Dylan thought of phoenix tears from old dengs to scorch away competing scents, leaving only a ghost of memory, perhaps enough for Snape to recall an older, quieter memory. 11-year-old Severus proudly separating daffodil root powder in potions, and a Muggle girl's shampoo drifting in through a classroom window. He would probably need potions to bind the smells to memory. The idea cheered him as much as a cheering charm. Back in the common room, the Duel Club news had preceded him. Students who had returned earlier told others about Harry's parseltongue, and the chatter was relentless. Dylan walked straight to the boys' dormitory. Inside, Harry sat on his bed, hugging his knees, dazed. Ron and a few others looked solemn. Students in the corridor peered in until the door clicked shut. Harry glanced up when Dylan entered, bewildered. "Dylan, Hermione said Parseltongue means you could be Slytherin's heir. Am I a descendant of Slytherin?" Dylan cocked his head. Being frightened by bloodline didn't suit Harry. He tried for humor and raised his wand. "Cheering charm." A soft glow drifted to Harry and lightened his expression a bit, steadying him. Dylan sat down on his own bed and said bluntly, "Your parents are gone, Harry. Would it matter if you had Slytherin blood?" Harry's face twitched. Dylan realized his frankness had landed poorly. He tried a different tack. "Your father's family, Potter, are they Slytherin? Your mum was Muggle-born, right?" Harry nodded blankly. "Then where would Slytherin blood have come from?" Dylan asked. He pinched Harry's forehead between finger and thumb and flicked quickly, a small but sharp pop. Harry yelped and clapped a hand to his head. Dylan's fingers had been testing more than muscle. He was probing the fragment of Voldemort's soul inside Harry with small, controlled magics. Imperious impulses, rough necromantic taps, a taste of parasitic possession wards, a little jolt of expulso, enough to see how the fragment reacted without tearing it free. Harry's pain was real but short-lived. The link between their souls made such experimentation risky, so Dylan kept it within harmless limits. "It can't be pried off directly," he said quietly. "But don't worry, you're not the heir because the chamber was clearly opened by whatever did the blood writing and attacked Madame Norris, none of which you were involved in." Harry let out a shaky breath. "So that means I'm not." "Exactly," Dylan smiled. "Even if you have Slytherin blood somewhere in your lineage, you're a descendant, not necessarily a direct heir. Britain doesn't have that many wizarding families. Lines cross. It's nothing like being the heir." Ron brightened immediately. "Dylan's right. You're Gryffindor, and you fought with us when the chamber was opened. There's no way you did it." Harry hesitated. "But the Sorting Hat said I'd do well in Slytherin." Dylan rolled his eyes. "The Sorting Hat also told me to go to Azkaban once. You believe everything a hat says?" They all laughed a little, tension easing. Neville and Siamus chimed in to back Harry up. The group's support helped Harry accept it. Being perhaps linked to Slytherin by blood didn't make him the heir, and he was still in Gryffindor. But outside their little dormitory bubble, Hogwarts reacted differently. During Friday's classes, people who had greeted Harry before now kept their distance. He became, for a while, a loner, except for Ron and Hermione, who stuck close. At dinner, Harry muttered, "So this is what it's like to be shunned. How does Dylan stand it?" Dylan, who spent most days immersed in study and generally kept to himself, was no stranger to being admired at a distance and treated as difficult to approach. Everyone found him a bit aloof, and that had made him lonely in its own way. Hermione glanced at Dylan and, with her usual mixture of impatience and protectiveness, told Harry, "Mind your own business." Chapter 144. Christmas is coming. Harry, stay sad. I'm going to buy a sweet. Late into the night, past midnight, Dylan popped a strip of mandrake leaf into his mouth and checked his achievement notifications. It was easier to unlock achievements early on. The more he played, the fewer obvious opportunities remained, and the rarer achievements were getting harder to trigger. Even though he'd handed Lockhart a harsh lesson in the duel club, it hadn't lit up any high-tier rewards. The only worthwhile outcome was that the system had granted him a spell, not the top-level one, but something useful. Achievement: Rip open the imposter's belly. Description: Lockhart is a fraud. Expose him. Disembowel him. Requirement: disembowel Lockhart. Reward: Level 5 Obliviate. Because it wasn't a maximum level reward, Dylan didn't get a vivid hallucination of casting the spell. The knowledge was simply uploaded into his mind. Message: Congratulations, you have mastered the Level 5 memory charm. Obliviate. Just a Level 5 memory charm, Dylan muttered. He felt the spell's shape in his head. Obliviate was a memory charm that usually became available to 3rd or 4th year students and above. It was notoriously difficult to master for younger students. In combat, it didn't do direct physical damage, but erasing memories mid-fight could ruin an opponent's ability to use magic, or even their sense of self. If someone suddenly couldn't remember who they were, the fight would be over. They'd be at the mercy of whoever cast the charm. Dylan could tell that Obliviate worked best when the target's emotions were subdued. Strong willpower or volatile emotions made the charm much harder to land. Aurors trying to memory control hardened Death Eaters often ran into resistance. Cases like Lockhart's, where it worked every time, were rare. Lockhart's trick had always been to get close, become familiar, then take people by surprise from behind. No wonder he seemed to have endless success. Lying back, Dylan let his mind wander. If a Level 5 Obliviate came from disemboweling Lockhart, what would the reward be for something more dramatic? He imagined Confringo shattering Lockhart's legs, snapping off a 5th limb, peeling him alive, setting him ablaze like a lantern. A series of increasingly gratuitous images ran through his head until sleep claimed him. Over the next few days, Harry continued to be treated with suspicion, but Dylan didn't pay much attention. Neville, on the other hand, kept pestering him to help Professor Sprout dress the young mandrakes in the greenhouse, scarves and tiny socks to protect them for the winter. Last year, Sprout had handled it herself, but this year, Neville had become confident enough to volunteer and ask Dylan to come along. Sprout rarely allowed students to help, but Neville had been through a year of special training with her, and she trusted him. With Dylan along too, she felt even more comfortable. Dressing mandrakes was as much physical work as technical, and 2 students made the job much easier. Mandrakes had to be pulled from their pots by hand. Spells could harm their roots and affect their medicinal value. So Dylan and Neville worked as a team. Dylan would yank them free, and Neville, wearing gloves and earmuffs, would slip on the little socks and scarves and press them back into the soil. Dylan would sometimes mimic a threatening spell with his wand to make the plants quiet down. You could frighten them without a real charm, but it shouldn't be done too often, or it would affect their growth. When Dylan yanked one out with a sharp pop, its howl filled the greenhouse. He waved his wand to intimidate it, but this particular mandrake paused, blinked, and fixed him with a weirdly expectant look. Under Neville's baffled stare, Dylan tapped it twice with the wand, just a firm rap, and the screaming stopped. The plant blinked, cocked its head, and seemed to say, in all the wrong ways, "Hit me 2 more times. Hit me 2 more times." Dylan's face twitched. This one was special. He signaled Neville to hurry and finished dressing it before it made any more unsettling expressions. Neville, snapping out of it, shoved the scarf and socks on as fast as he could and reburied the mandrake, adding fertilizer as Professor Sprout had instructed. For a fearful second, it seemed to wink at Dylan before the soil covered its eyes. Dylan shivered. A perverted plant. Perfect. They finished the last pot, and Professor Sprout came over, smiling. "Christmas is coming," she said as she straightened her gloves. "Are you planning to go home?" Neville sniffed the lingering smell of fertilizer on his hands and nearly gagged. Dylan, who hadn't handled the muck at all, cast Scourgify on him to help. "No, Professor," Neville said, shaking his head. "I'll be staying here." Dylan shrugged. "I'm not sure yet." Sprout insisted on giving them a small reward. "You've been a great help. Come round later, Neville, and collect your herb. Dylan, what would you like?" Dylan was surprised. He hadn't expected a gift just for helping. His suitcase was small, but not full. There was room for more useful specimens. Thinking of a missing ingredient for a potion he'd been experimenting with, he smiled. "A chomping cabbage, if you don't mind." Sprout's eyebrows rose. "Those are trouble. Unlike mandrakes, they're aggressive. They bite." "I know," Dylan said. "I need one for a potion I'm researching. I'll be careful." She laughed. "I trust you, but I'll add protective charms." She left and returned quickly with a potted chomping cabbage in a silenced, reinforced container. "I've set a silencing charm and a few protections. Be careful." "Thanks," Dylan said gratefully. They left the greenhouse and walked toward the castle. Neville kept sniffing himself and casting cleaning spells. Outside, Dylan noticed the castle felt off. People were hurrying, and many seemed distressed. There was an edge of panic in the air. "What's wrong?" Neville whispered. Dylan shrugged. "I don't know." They hurried to the Gryffindor common room and pushed through a crowd of students buzzing with rumors. Justin Finch Fletchley was attacked. Wasn't he the one who got too close during Malfoy's summoned snake and almost got bitten, saved by Harry? How do you know Harry saved him? Someone says Harry controlled the snake. Whatever, when they found Justin, he was petrified. Not just him, another voice said. Nearly headless Nick was attacked, floating, pitch black all over. How does a potion work on ghosts? How do you even give a ghost a restorative draught? Dylan slowed and listened. The basilisk had struck again. This time, the victims wouldn't necessarily be saved by the mandrake restorative draught. They only had one small bottle left in circulation. Dylan thought, if he could get a pound or two of Phoenix tears from Dumbledore, maybe he could have something to contribute, but Phoenix tears weren't something you could just requisition. Outside the dorm, Neville asked in a small voice, "Dylan, do you really think Harry could be the heir of Slytherin?" Dylan shook his head. "No, but knowing people can be saved when they're petrified is enough for now." He kept the mandrake leaf clenched between his teeth and tried to sound reassuring. "Don't worry. If anyone's attacked, I'll talk to Professor Snape and Professor Sprout. We'll brew more mandrake potion as fast as we can." Neville's face went pale. "But Colin said he only saw a blurry shadow before he was petrified. What if the monster eats people? What if it swallows me whole? Then the potion won't help, will it?" He made a small, worried noise. Dylan's mouth twitched. That was true. If a basilisk swallowed someone whole, a restorative draught wouldn't help much. They might come back as a pile of bones. He thought of the white skeletons in the Chamber of Secrets and tried not to dwell on it. Back in the dormitory, Harry and the others entered, looking miserable. Ron grumbled, "I've already defended Harry, but nobody believes him." If he really was the heir, Hermione would be first up for it." Dylan smirked at Ron's unfounded jealousy. Harry shrugged. "It's fine, as long as I know it wasn't me." "How can you say that's fine?" Ron snapped. "If someone's falsely accusing you." Harry only sighed. "People are scared. It's understandable. At least Christmas is almost here." "Let them all go home," Ron said. "We're staying. I'm staying here with you." Harry's eyes brightened a little. The dorm atmosphere eased. Neville and Seamus returned, and seeing Dylan packing, they hurried to get their own things ready. "You're leaving for Christmas?" Ron asked, surprised. Dylan nodded. "Yeah, 2 days. I'm not staying." "Going home?" Harry asked hesitantly. "My parents probably miss me," Dylan said loosely. He didn't plan to stay at home long, perhaps not at all. There were things he needed to do outside school, and this was his chance. He told Harry he'd refrain from getting involved in whatever the others were planning and to update him when they returned. That evening, Dylan closed his book and began packing. He'd already prepared Christmas gifts for the professors, transformation notebooks tailored to each, a Quidditch transforming notebook for McGonagall, a potion brewing notebook for Snape that opened into a small cauldron, a crystal ball transformation notebook for Trelawney, gifts that fit their tastes without being too on the nose. He'd recycled most ideas from previous years to save time. On Christmas Eve, the school announced an early holiday. Everyone could leave a day early. Hogwarts emptied. Nearly every student went home. A few stayed behind to keep Harry company, but mostly the dorms were deserted. Dylan left too. He'd told the professors to leave his gifts on his bed rather than send them home. He wasn't going to be there to receive packages. Outside school, Dylan had other plans. He no longer wanted to mug dark wizards. They were too poor to be worth the risk. But he did hope to mobilize his followers to raise funds for him. He remembered reports of a new fangirl, Delphine, who had been caught. She shouldn't be out so soon. He'd let his followers accumulate money and then appear to collect it, easier than hassling Gringotts, maybe. More importantly, Dylan wanted a proper hideout. He'd read about properties like Number 12, Grimmauld Place, expensive and conspicuous. He didn't need a mansion, just a small house he could set up as a portkey destination and a personal safe house. His suitcase, a secret compact space, was handy, but it couldn't serve as a portkey destination, and he couldn't store the suitcase inside itself. He didn't want to rely on his parents' address. If something went wrong, he could end up running into the worst possible place. A small, discreet property would solve that. He also had practical reasons to curry favor with the ministry. If he could save someone like Cedric Diggory, a popular Hufflepuff, whose father worked in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, it would open doors. Cedric was well-liked, a Quidditch star, and his death in the Triwizard Tournament would become a story the ministry would want to spin. Dylan had seen enough to resent the ministry's corruption. Saving Cedric would not only be kind, it would be strategically useful. If Cedric later helped Dylan secure breeding licenses or access to confiscated magical creatures, it would be mutually beneficial. On the train out of Hogwarts, Dylan stared at the receding countryside and thought about his plans. Buy a small house, use it as a portkey hub, stock it with resources, and keep building influence. He wrote a list in his head: how to trade acromantula venom for galleons, how to get phoenix tears if necessary, and how to turn small favors into big advantages. He even smiled at the absurdity of an achievement he'd earned back at home. Achievement: Cockroach Slayer. Description: you are the bane of cockroaches. 1 shot, 1 kill. Requirement: kill all cockroaches in an entire area. Ward: special effect: pressure on infernal roaches. Trait: pressure on infernal roaches. Your presence terrifies lesser pests. When activated, cockroaches tremble, collapse, and wait for you to finish them off. Pointless, maybe, but it was another small power in a world he was learning to bend to his will. And Cedric, he kept coming back to that thought. Saving a popular senior could be the first step toward broader influence. Dylan grinned privately. If he played it right, people would owe him favors. That was charisma, too, useful in its own way. Chapter 145. The obsidian restorative I've been working on is coming along. The manor is nice, too. Old Goblin, can you help me after work? After Christmas, at the next full moon, I can make another trip into the Forbidden Forest to finish my animagus transformation and see if the unicorn is there. Dylan stared out at the passing countryside. He already had an umber shadow and a giant dragon with him. The unicorn might not become a pet, but drawing a little of its blood now and then would be useful. It would also be nice to get a niffler, a black platypus-like creature. He'd been fascinated by them in his previous life. Now that he was here, why not raise one? As for saving Cedric, Dylan planned to send his alternate account, Carthus. That raised a problem he couldn't ignore. He couldn't be in 2 places at once. Whenever he became Carthus, Dylan himself would be absent. That was awkward. He couldn't always pull off a flawless transformation in front of witnesses. He wasn't a magical girl. He let the landscape slide by for a while, then opened the notes he'd copied from the restricted section and started reading again. He'd borrowed 3 books: Tracing Ancient Magic, Analysis of Ultimate Spells, and a general understanding of souls and forbidden manipulation. The material about souls and forbidden manipulation was especially stimulating. Combined with the soul-related spells he already knew, it sparked dozens of fresh ideas. He even sketched an outline for a new spell, Nothing complete yet, but promising. Creating a spell wasn't child's play. It wasn't just about devising an incantation. The structure of the magic, how it operated, how it was channeled and controlled, all of that needed to be built painstakingly, piece by piece. Every trial had to be precise. Even a tiny deviation could mean failure or worse. Uncontrolled magic, explosions, unpredictable and dangerous side effects. His new spell touched on the soul and the body at critical points, so he needed living test subjects. Nocturne Alley would have been the obvious place to find dark wizards, but the last time he'd been there, the Auror sweep had lasted far too long. After the sweep, scores of dark wizards had been taken away. The ones left behind were injured, missing limbs, or on their last legs, hardly suitable for experiment. If they were too fragile, they'd probably panic and die under the strain of his trials, forcing him to use Putreflorifera, the rotten flower spell, to turn them into what he'd nicknamed obsidian flowers, those black blooms that sprouted from corpses. He'd been studying those obsidian flowers for a long time. They were mysterious and maddeningly inconsistent. Repeated experiments had shown they could regrow severed limbs, revive decaying souls, and restore corpses, but Dylan couldn't distill those effects cleanly into a reliable potion. Even the flowers alone didn't always do much, though mashed petals applied to an open wound produced clear, rapid healing. If he could uncover the flower's deepest secret, he suspected he could brew a revolutionary restorative potion that might change lives. He'd already made the first version of an obsidian recovery potion. Fortunately, he now had access to unicorn hair and blood, an umber shadow, and a giant dragon. He occasionally encountered or harvested rare materials in the Forbidden Forest. Professor Snape sent him potions from time to time. Neville had given him a mandrake, and he had other materials saved up. Those resources had let him run many trials. The initial potion was potent. If a limb had been severed within the past 24 hours, applying the potion and binding the wound could begin reattaching the limb within an hour. With careful application around the wound, structure could be restored in a few days. It wasn't full healing. The limb would still need a long recovery, but it was a miracle compared to ordinary magic. Dylan didn't yet know how long the final convalescence would be. He needed more cases and more observation. For now, it was the prototype. With better proportions, substitutions, and brewing technique, he believed the effect would only improve. The bottleneck was always the obsidian flowers. Without them, no amount of exotic ingredients would help. He had enough flowers for small batches. 5 petals from a goblin corpse were sufficient for a single dose, and cockroaches and other base ingredients weren't a problem. But if he intended to scale production, he needed more common substitutes or a way to farm the flowers. He also considered creating tiers of the potion: beginner, intermediate, advanced, powerful, rare, supreme, each with different effects and prices. That way the potion could be both accessible and profitable. His current recipe included obsidian flowers and mandrake root as core elements, plus 10 grams of pearl powder, 3 unicorn hairs, 5 grams of moonstone powder, and half of a dragon's blood flower, a rare ingredient Snape had once given him. The rest of the items were expensive, but most had been gifted or harvested. If he ever produced the potion at scale, distribution would be a challenge, and he wanted the ingredients to be common enough that the potion could be widely used. Sometimes Dylan missed the efficiency of technology. Magic was powerful, but with an artificial intelligence to run simulations and optimize formulas, he could iterate so much faster. He imagined an AI like the Red Queen or Jarvis running potion trials. The thought made him smile. By the time the train pulled into King's Cross, the countryside had given way to signs of towns again. Dylan shut his parchment away. Goblins could serve as experimental subjects, but they weren't ideal. They were too blunt, their thoughts little more than instinct, pain, hunger, sleepiness. Legilimency could sense their surface emotions, but it gave him little useful feedback about subtle effects. For meaningful results, he needed wizards who could describe their sensations in detail. If necessary, he'd look for dark wizards. A stroll through Azkaban would solve that, and the upcoming Quidditch World Cup would attract Death Eaters. He wasn't desperate. His research was only in early stages, and progress with goblins, however slow, was still progress. Dylan went straight to Diagon Alley. If he wanted to understand wizarding real estate, there was no better place. He knew Gringotts handled property transactions as well as banking, and if he wanted to buy now or in the future, he'd get the best information here. He had a little more in the way of galleons saved and a modest amount of inventory space in his magical suitcase, enough for now. He planned to wait until his parents transferred a larger sum and then expand his holdings. He'd invested a lot into the suitcase lately and kept many things in inventory, including wand effects and robes bought from Madame Malkin. He could always customize more later. A unique wand effect would make an account memorable. He had no intention of repeating his previous pink, fluffy rabbit wand effect. Instead, he imagined something grander for a secondary account, a holy light effect that flashed brilliantly when he fired the Staff of Authority. An Avada Kedavra could explode into blinding light instead of appearing as a green jet. That sounded fitting for Karthus. At Diagon Alley's entrance, Dylan was scanned by an Auror doing security work. Of all people, an Auror as a doorman, the alley had changed. The Auror saw Dylan's youth, smiled, and let him pass with only a cursory look. Inside, Aurors patrolled openly. Dylan gave them a casual glance and moved on. Gringotts was more active than ever. As the Wizarding Bank, it handled large loans and received countless properties as collateral. Mortgages here were linked to houses and estates, and when borrowers died or defaulted, Gringotts often ended up with the property and auctioned it off. Goblins liked property. It was another way for Gringotts to get its hands on tangible assets, and their contracts and forges gave them control over both gold and the flow of currency. Dylan approached the real estate counter and asked for someone who handled property. He was led to an older goblin who specialized in estates. Gringotts didn't put the inexperienced on such work. The goblin wheeled a stack of parchment into a quiet room, and the smell of magical ink and wood made the chamber feel old and private. "We have many kinds of properties," the goblin said, spreading maps and listings. He pointed to a small cottage, a traditional English country magical cottage tucked at the edge of an ancient wood. It comes with a powerful amulet to ward off muggles. "What does it do?" Dylan asked. The goblin smiled. "It makes the house impossible for muggles to find. Also included is a house elf for automatic cleaning and a magic garden that changes with the seasons." "Price? 90,000 galleons," the goblin replied. Dylan made a face, cozy but isolated. He preferred something livelier, a manor perhaps. The goblin's eyes lit up. He slid another parchment forward. "This is a medium-sized manor," he said. "Excellent location, between a magic village and a busy market. Far enough from noise, but close to trade. It sits on 82 acres with a well-kept lawn and even a Quidditch pitch. The main house has 3 floors and many rooms. The basement has been converted into a modern potion laboratory with top lighting and ventilation, ideal for research. And yep, strong magical protections keep it hidden from muggles." "And the price?" Dylan asked. The goblin's grin broadened. 500,000 galleons. Dylan hid his disappointment. He had only a few tens of thousands on hand. He also had a trick he didn't want to use. Using Imperio on the goblin to steal the money would expose him. Karthus and Dylan both needed to keep their true identity secret. He let the goblin continue his sales pitch. "Once you pay in full, Gringotts will place the deed in a crystal ball and store it in our deep underground archives, sealed by layers of magic. We can also arrange for memory charms on all goblins involved in the transaction, so the details remain hidden. If the sealing fee is not paid later, the property will revert to common knowledge." Dylan met the goblin's eyes and casually read his thoughts. Legilimency was a tool. Why not use it? The goblin's inner voice was petty and calculating. This young wizard must be an easy mark, he thought, too young to know better. If a manor worth 200,000 could be sold for 500, the goblin could earn a handsome commission. Dylan smiled without revealing he'd seen every greedy addendum. "It's a lovely property," Dylan said, standing. "I'll think about it. Thank you." The goblin froze, then quickly recovered his professional smile and offered to press for a discount. Dylan declined lightly and left. No reason to haggle when he couldn't pay. Outside, Diagon Alley bustled. Aurors were still visible at intervals. The Ministry had been furious after Dylan's recent troubles. He'd injured several Aurors while escaping. The thought made him smirk. He wandered Flourish and Blots, bought more books, subscribed to a few newspapers, and checked supply shops for rare potion ingredients and everyday necessities. He picked up a large bag and stored it in his inventory. Ahead, Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor gleamed invitingly. It was cold, but Dylan wanted dessert and a chance to chat with Florian about ministry gossip. Florian's daughter worked at the ministry as an auror, and Dylan wanted to learn whether Florian's daughter was someone he might have met. The bell chimed as he pushed open the door. The wind chimes above the entrance froze for a heartbeat, then trembled and chimed a soft, clear note. Dylan scanned the room. Florian wasn't at the counter. The frost patterns on the glass slowly flowed, then for a heartbeat outlined the silhouette from the ministry's wanted poster. Carthus, skeletal, unmistakable. The pattern steamed into mist as a swell of heat from the stove blurred the shape away. Chapter 146. Fukasco's daughter is so pretty I want to chase her. And Severus, happy birthday. They even put my wanted poster up in the ice cream shop. Dylan Hawkwood's lips curved. He didn't pay it much mind. Fukasco had mentioned that his daughter worked at the ministry, so it wasn't surprising she'd asked her father to post a wanted notice in his shop to help promote her case. As he stepped inside, he heard a faint argument coming from the back. Voices of a man and a woman. "What's going on?" Dylan cleared his throat and called out loudly, "Mr. Fukasco, are you in the shop?" The argument stopped immediately. A moment later, the back door creaked, and Fukasco poked his head out, looking a little like someone slipping out of a hidden passage. He stopped when he saw Dylan, then broke into a warm smile. "Christmas already? Sit down anywhere. I'll be right with you." He slipped back inside and murmured something in a low voice to the other person. Not long after, the back door opened again and Fukasco stepped out, followed by a young woman. She wore an auror's black uniform. Brown hair fell past her shoulders, with the ends curling inward. Her figure was slender and well-proportioned. A black belt at her waist carried a wand holster, a small magic alarm, and portable potion vials. Dylan noticed her fair cheeks, clear pale blue eyes that held a cool gleam, a high nose, and subtly tinted lips. Her mouth was set in a slight downward line. She looked indifferent, with a stubbornness threaded through it. "This is my daughter, Vera Clementina Fukasco." Fukasco introduced them with a smile. Vera. The name clicked for Dylan. He had overheard aurors mentioning Vera had been the one who captured Delphini. He hadn't expected she was Fukasco's daughter. Fascinating. Fukasco's girl, who was tough enough to subdue someone as notorious as Delphini. "Hello, I'm Dylan Hawkwood. I study at Hogwarts," Dylan offered. Vera's pale blue eyes flicked over him. After a moment, she gave a small, measured smile. "Hello, my name is Vera Clementina." Fukasco looked exasperated. "Hey, Vera, don't start." When Vera glanced at her father, her expression froze. "Don't even think about changing my surname," she said coldly. Fukasco deflated, then sighed. "You smile so nicely at strangers, but give your old man that face." Vera fell silent. Fukasco turned back to Dylan. "She came by to put up a wanted poster. There's one on the counter." Dylan nodded. He'd seen it. "It's rare to have her here. I wanted to chat a bit." "I'm sorry, Mr. Fukasco. I don't have time to talk. You're wasting my work time." Vera lifted a foot as if to leave. "Tomorrow's Christmas, and today's a holiday. What work do you have?" Fukasco grumbled. Vera pressed her lips together. The work was likely a good excuse not to linger with her father. Dylan felt the situation was more complicated than he'd guessed. He hadn't expected Fukasco's daughter to be so striking, nor that father and daughter would be at odds. Was it proper for him to stay? Dylan cleared his throat. "Uncle, I came to thank you. You sponsored my tuition last time. Those galleons helped me a lot. Since your daughter's here, I should probably leave." Before he finished, Vera cut in. "He sponsored you for school?" "Yes," Dylan said. "Mr. Fukasco's very generous." Vera's gaze flicked to her father with a touch of suspicion. Fukasco, sensing it, puffed out his chest and gave Dylan a conspiratorial wink. Who knew how many ice creams it took to buy that favor? The work's done. I'm off." Vera moved toward the door. Fukasco hesitated, clearly wanting to say more. Dylan spoke up, trying to smooth things over. "Sister Vera, do you and Mr. Fukasco have a disagreement? Last time I was here, he only praised you. I'm sure he cares for you." "You don't understand," Vera said sharply. "Exactly. That's why I wanted you to explain." Dylan's smile was innocent. He tried to keep the tone light. Professor Flitwick speaks highly of you, by the way. Vera's expression softened briefly. I graduated Ravenclaw. I still keep in touch with Professor Flitwick. She glanced at him. You're young and already playing peacemaker? We're only 8 years apart, Dylan replied primly. I just wanted to help. Vera's annoyance thawed a little. Dylan asked casually, when I came to Diagon Alley before, I saw aurors catching people. What did those people do? Her brow knit. Why do you ask? I ran into aurors a couple of times when I was here, Dylan said with a mock innocent grin. Now I'm wondering if you're trying to arrest me when I come in next. Fukasco laughed from behind them. Karthus showed up twice. Both times Dylan came for ice cream. Diagon Alley's fairly safe, Vera replied, hand on the door. Avoid Nocturne Alley and you'll usually be fine. I know, my professors warned me, Dylan agreed. She grimaced. Although it's Christmas, aurors are shortening their holidays to search for Karthus. Vera's voice grew serious. He's dangerous. He seems to have mastered the Unforgivable Curses, using Imperio and Cruciatus as soon as he attacks. He's frantic. If he's still at large, who knows what he'll do next? The Ministry doesn't want a second. She broke off when Fukasco scolded her. Be careful, Father, she finished reluctantly. The stiffness in her voice melted into something softer for a heartbeat. Dylan could hear a daughter's concern. Dylan guessed a life story, maybe a failed marriage, a separation, Vera raised by her mother, a strained father-daughter relationship. He didn't pry. Vera was young and stubborn, tsundere perhaps. He smiled and let it drop. Fukasco chuckled nervously. If you can't beat him, at least hide. Don't rush into danger. Vera pursed her lips. Right, I'll go to the next shop to post wanted posters. She had one foot already outside when she turned back, deliberately pouting. You'll be alone on Christmas again, won't you? Going to pester Ollivander? Stop bothering him. Since it's Christmas Eve, you should cook more, Fukasco blurted. I may not have time to eat it. If I'm in a good mood after my work, I might come over. She pushed the door open and slipped out. Fukasco stood rooted to the spot, throat tight. Dylan chuckled. Uncle, it's late. If you want to cook for her, you'd better start. Fukasco's face thawed into a grin, completely genuine, the wrinkles around his eyes crinkling. Ha! That's why I sponsored you those galleons. Of course, she'd spend Christmas with me. I'm so happy. I have to close up and get some things. He hurried about, flipping the open sign to closed and bustling off to gather supplies. Dylan watched him go, hands in his pockets, looking up at the dusk sky. The sun was a molten orange, draping Diagon Alley in a golden glow as night fell. 5:30, Gringotts gates closed for the day. After tabulating accounts and locking away contracts and valuables, a weary goblin left through a side door. He stood before a fireplace in a quiet stretch of Diagon Alley and began to scatter powder when an unseen spell struck him from behind. He blacked out and fell. When he came to, his clothes moved as if an invisible hand tugged at them. A bulging money sack floated from his jacket and spilled gold coins into the air, which vanished into nothingness. When he saw his empty sack, the goblin's wail echoed faintly down the now empty street. Dylan, on his way home, checked his money column out of habit. His balance had jumped by over 300,000 galleons. He frowned at the sudden surge, but resisted the urge to convert the coins into suitcase space. He would deal with it later. It was Christmas Eve. He wanted to spend at least part of the holiday at home. He slipped the shadow ring on and rode his broom under the warm glow of the street lamps. When he arrived, he floated to a corner and dispelled the ring. Mom, I'm home. The kitchen smell wrapped around him. Maeve came out, drying her hands, and took his coat. You're late. Dinner's almost ready. Wash up. He washed and dried his hands, then sat at a table piled with dishes. Hubert, already at the table, grinned. Enough money left? Hubert had been lavish these past months. Dylan's tuition alone had cost millions of pounds. Hubert had paid without fuss and rather liked showing off that he could. Dylan teased his father about future expenses, and Hubert faltered, then recovered with fatherly bluster. The three of them ate, talked, and laughed. Outside, soft snow began to fall. Christmas Eve went by quietly. On Christmas Day, Dylan went back to Diagon Alley. Florin Fortescue's ice cream parlor remained closed, but Fukasco and Vera had apparently made up. Dylan lingered at Gringotts and went straight to the goblin he'd seen the day before. The goblin still looked haggard. "It's you again," the goblin muttered. Dylan feigned interest in property. "I was thinking about the house. The price is a bit steep. Could you do lower?" The goblin's face brightened at the thought of a buyer. He led Dylan down into Gringotts to the Chamber of Contracts. "I'll give you a special price, 350,000 galleons. My bottom line is 200,000, Dylan said. The goblin nearly choked. 200,000? You're joking. Not joking. I'll add 10. 210,000. Take it or leave it." The goblin weighed his options, looking at Dylan like the boy might be a robber. The thought of the earlier theft still fresh. He swallowed and blurted, "Fine, 210,000. It's yours." They signed the contract. The moment the magical agreement took effect, Dylan felt something settle in his soul, a stronger, binding sensation than any school guarantee. The contract's hold was absolute. He thought, wryly, about whether future breakthroughs in his own soul research might let him cheat such magic. For now, the deed was done, a manor his. With the house resolved, Dylan spent the rest of the holiday at home, tinkering in his experiments. When the break ended, he returned to Hogwarts amid sterner supervision. Dumbledore seemed to be taking the threat of Horcruxes seriously, and security felt tighter. Dylan suspected Dumbledore had removed Secrets of the Most Advanced Dark Arts from the restricted section and was keeping it in his office. Back at school, studies and research resumed. Soon Professor Snape's birthday arrived. Snow lay thick outside. Even the Whomping Willow was subdued under the weight of it. "Professor, do we really need to surprise Severus like this?" Dylan asked, eyeing his costume. He stood in Snape's office in a wig and a dark robe, an imitation of Severus himself. Dumbledore laughed. "I don't think anything would surprise him more than you dressed like this, Dylan. You suggested we celebrate Severus. You should be a part of it." Dylan's face twitched. "Are you sure he won't hex me on sight?" "You'll manage," Dumbledore said with a grin. "You look like him," McGonagall said, smiling. "A strange likeness." Flitwick nodded. "Muggle makeup is amazing. You can alter your appearance without a spell." Dylan leaned against the door and waited. Someone had sent Snape away under false pretenses. They expected him back soon. Severus strode back toward his office, fuming about Lockhart's idiocy and the peculiar behavior of his colleagues. He paused at the door. Something was off. He raised his wand and pushed the door open with a charm. There, before him, stood a smaller version of himself. Reflex took over. "Sectum Sempra." "What? Wait, Professor, it's me, Protego." Dylan dodged aside. "Dylan?" Severus's voice cracked with disbelieving surprise. Before he could demand how, Dumbledore waved his wand and there was a loud bang. Colorful, non-burning fireworks burst into the room, gold and silver ribbons that fluttered like enchanted fireflies. Flitwick and McGonagall added twinkling lights. Severus stood stunned, then his expression hardened. "Surprise! Happy birthday!" Dylan called out, doing his best to sound festive. "Happy birthday, Severus," the others chimed. "You'll set my office on fire," Severus muttered, voice low. "These are cold fireworks," Dumbledore soothed. "They won't burn." At that moment, an errant spark alighted on a book and popped it into flame. Flitwick hurried over and snuffed it. "No one told me they were cold fireworks," he said, embarrassed. Dumbledore and McGonagall exchanged amused glances. "Severus, look at your expression. Don't you see a resemblance to Dylan?" Severus glared at Dylan, whose wig sat slightly askew. "Who dressed you like this?" Dylan looked to Dumbledore for the answer. Severus scowled. "Albus, have you lost your mind?" Despite the scolding, Dumbledore's face remained gentle. "Severus, it's your birthday. We brought presents." He nodded toward a neat pile of wrapped boxes on the table and a modest cake. Severus paused. He hadn't had a proper birthday celebration in years, perhaps since his falling out with Lily, perhaps even earlier. Dumbledore's small gifts had been a habit. Once, an arrogant young wizard had given him a black robe that he still wore. The unexpected attention warmed something in Severus he tended to keep tightly shut. Ribbons drifted down and settled on Severus's hair, which, thanks to a hair potion Dylan had given him at Christmas, looked less greasy and strangely softer. Severus kept his face stern. "This cake is treacle tart filling," Dumbledore explained. "I made it myself." Dylan stepped forward. "I haven't tried it, but you should. Today you should have the first bite." Severus's brief softness snapped back into cynicism. "If it's so good, why aren't you eating it?" he demanded. Dylan smiled sheepishly. Because it's your birthday. Silence held for a beat. Then the small office filled with a peculiar mix of awkwardness and warmth, an odd, quiet celebration for a man who rarely allowed himself the luxury of being celebrated. After Professor Snape's birthday passed, Dylan noticed a change. In class, the potions master was softer, even towards Gryffindors. Where Snape used to sneer that Ron was dumber than a troll, now he would only grumble that he was as reckless as a headless ghost. It was so gentle that Ron himself looked bewildered. One evening after tutoring with Professor Flitwick, Dylan returned to the dormitory and didn't find Harry and the others. They came back near curfew, faces serious. Dylan raised an eyebrow. Something happened? They exchanged looks, then, glancing at Seamus and Neville already in bed, slipped over to Dylan and tried to sit on his bed. "Wait," he protested. "You're going to sit on my quilt with your coats on? Can't you see the mud?" "Sorry," Harry muttered, frozen, half-seated. He hurriedly flicked his wand. "Scourgify." The mud vanished, and they both settled down awkwardly beside Dylan. Coleball's head peered from under Dylan's quilt. Dylan scratched the creature's chin and pulled him closer as he watched Harry and Ron fidget. "What happened?" Harry sighed. "It's Hermione. She was attacked tonight. She was attacked tonight." Dylan raised an eyebrow. Their shock at his calm irritated Dylan. They stared at him. "It was serious," Harry said. "If we hadn't found her, she could have been killed by that thing." "Do you still have any mandrake restorative draught?" Ron blurted. "Hermione's in the infirmary." Dylan shook his head. "I gave what I had away. One bottle saved Madame Norris, another saved Harry's admirer. There's none left." Ron's face fell. Harry looked grim. "Don't panic," Harry said. "Neville and I checked the greenhouses before Christmas. They're growing well. The mandrakes should be mature soon." Dylan tilted his head. "Once they're mature, Snape will brew a restorative draught. He can make it faster than I could." Harry nodded. "That's the only real solution." Ron seethed silently. Harry glanced at Seamus and Neville. They were half asleep. Lowering his voice, Harry pulled a notebook from his bag. "We found this in the second-floor girls' bathroom, the one that was in the papers because of Malfoy." Dylan's gaze dropped to the notebook in Harry's hand. The front page had a smeared name. The rest was blank. "But everything else is empty?" Harry handed it over. Dylan took the slim volume calmly. "Hermione went to the library to look up the owner. She must have found something and gone to investigate. Then she was attacked. When we found her, she had a mirror and a scrap of paper," Ron added. "The note said the monster in the Chamber of Secrets might be a basilisk. And the diary's owner, Tom Riddle, was given a special award 50 years ago," Harry said. "Professor Binns told us the Chamber of Secrets was opened then, and someone died." "We think it's Tom's diary," Ron said. "It might record what happened back then. But the writing's mostly gone. We tried revealing spells and ink removers. Nothing works," Harry said. He looked at Dylan. "You're good at divination. Can you tell us anything from this?" Dylan prodded the leather with a thumb. "Divination's messy. I can try, but it may take time." "Can you at least see whether this monster, or the Heir of Slytherin, will do anything big to Hogwarts?" Ron begged. Dylan shrugged, reached into the cabinet, and set a crystal ball on the bed. Coleball nosed at it. Dylan pushed him back. "No special props needed." He rested his hand over the glass. His slender fingers curved. He rotated the ball. A faint mist formed inside. Harry and Ron leaned forward, searching the fog for meaning. Dylan sat very still, eyes focused on the cloudy swirl. After a moment, he stilled, closed his eyes, and then said softly, "I see shadows." "Shadows?" They leaned in. "Shadows fighting," Dylan said. "In the end, Hogwarts stays intact." He opened his eyes and dropped the crystal ball back into the cabinet. He hadn't really done a full divination, just a vague prophecy that wouldn't commit him. If it came true, he'd have earned credit without much risk. "All right, it's late. You two should sleep." He kept the diary. Harry and Ron stood, still tense but calmer in light of his words. After they left, Dylan tried to tuck the diary into his inventory. No luck. He set it aside and picked up Coleball instead. "Sleep leaning on this," he told the creature, nudging the diary. Coleball blinked, repositioned, and plopped down with a satisfied snore. Dylan lay down and soon dozed off. When the night was deep, he woke. He had to spit out the mandrake leaf he'd kept in his mouth for a month. The leaf had been revoltingly soft and paste-like. Leaving Coldball asleep on Tom Riddle's diary, Dylan glanced at the beds where Harry and the others slept, then melted into shadow. The shadow ring plus Coldball's ability let him pass through solid walls. He slipped right through the castle and arrived at the edge of the forbidden forest. He'd planned to hunt acromantulas and maybe a unicorn for its fur, but the diary changed his priorities. He wanted to study it before it caused trouble nearby. Little Tom hadn't yet fully manifested. Tom Riddle's diary only contained a soul fragment that could influence whoever used it, as Ginny had been influenced in the original story. Dylan wasn't worried about Tom recognizing his meddling. He possessed high-level soul magic. He wasn't afraid of a fragment. Besides, what damage could it cause beyond controlling a basilisk? He paused at the forest edge. The sky was impossibly clear. Moonlight washed the trees in silver. Dylan took out a small crystal vial from his inventory, his saliva frozen inside. He carefully tucked the vial away and retrieved the mandrake leaf from under his tongue. He rolled the wet leaf and pushed it into the vial. Then he plucked a strand of his own hair, added it, and poured in a teaspoon of dew he'd collected from a place never touched by sunlight for 7 days. Finally, he slipped a death's head hawkmoth pupa into the mixture. The pupa glowed faintly under the moon. "This should do it," he murmured. The bottle held a crude mixture, not a proper potion, but the right ingredients. He buried it beneath the roots of an ancient tree in a patch of forest he knew Hagrid avoided. Hagrid's patrols and Dylan's warnings made it likely no one would disturb the spot before the storm came. Dylan had studied the animagus procedure from books and from what Professor McGonagall had said. The ritual had 4 key parts. First, keep a mandrake leaf in your mouth for a full lunar cycle, from one full moon to the next, without swallowing or removing it. Then, on the second full moon, place the saliva-soaked leaf in a vial, add a strand of your hair, dew from a sunless place, and the moth pupa, and leave the mixture in darkness until the next thunderstorm. Storms were unpredictable, so that step required luck. Third came chanting. Fourth, the final transformation. Satisfied, he returned to the dormitory. Coldball snored on the diary. Dylan muttered at the creature's newfound indifference. After playing with Norberta and other companions, Coldball no longer clung to him like before, but he let it go and slept fitfully. Before sunrise, he woke, raised his wand against his chest, and whispered the incantation, Amato Animo Animato Animagus. Sunrise burst like a giant Lumus Maxima, gilding the castle towers and brightening the forest mist. Dylan always found some pleasure in watching the world wake. At sunset, he repeated the chant. After dinner, he slipped into his suitcase space and pulled Tom Riddle's diary from among a pile of cockroaches where he'd stashed it. He'd been thinking all day. He wasn't going to hand the diary over immediately. He'd let Harry keep fighting Voldemort for now. But a little experiment wouldn't hurt. He used Imperio to bind the diary, maintaining himself invisibly with the shadow ring, then jabbed his wand. Avada Kedavra! A storm of sickly green light poured from his wand tip, 50 blasts like rain. The diary blackened and curled. Its cover looked scorched. Though the book made no sound, Dylan felt a shriek in his head. A powerful Horcrux, he muttered. Killing curses and Cruciatus couldn't truly kill a Horcrux. They could only burn it down a little. A Horcrux isn't alive the way we are, but neither is it an ordinary object. It houses a fragment of a soul and resists ordinary magic and harm. Only exceptionally rare forces, like Gryffindor's sword or cursed fiendfire, could destroy one completely. Dylan reflected on Voldemort's hubris, making multiple Horcruxes, thinking he could escape death. Oddly, that suited Dylan. He didn't want to chase down every Horcrux. If Voldemort's curse left crumbs for him to pick up later, fine. He'd rather keep to his studies and experiments than play Nemesis. He kept testing the diary with darker magics, then replenished the diary's drained strength by draining life from the cockroaches around it, feeding it back enough to look untouched. Gloves on, he lifted the restored diary, hesitated, and then decided to ask it something. Wand tip glowing with Sectum Sempra, he scratched slowly on the cover. Do you not kill women and children? A sulphurous burning smell rose. After a pause, crooked writing pushed through the scorched surface. I will not. Dylan wrote again. Really? The reply staggered out, painful to read. But your wife is not a child, and your son is certainly not a woman. The reply had been forced by Imperio. It was a dark, small joke, and Dylan grew bored. He killed more spiders for the diary's upkeep, then slipped it back into his suitcase. Overnight clouds rolled in. He felt a flicker of luck. He had buried the mixture right before the storm. Thunder boomed. Heavy rain fell. When the storm struck the bottle he'd hidden, the mixture had matured into a small quantity of blood-red potion. Dylan grinned and took it back to the dormitory. Alone, he opened his suitcase space, set the vial out, pointed his wand at his heart, and chanted. He uncorked the bottle and drank it at a swallow. A new heartbeat thudded in his ears, another life beating in tandem with his own. The two rhythms braided and blurred until they pummeled his eardrums. His body began to change. Fine green scales rose across his skin, catching the light. A presence flickered into his mind. He stared, stunned. I am actually... Chapter 148, Dragon Dylan, Fiend Fire from his mouth, Ghostly Magic Array. Dylan's muscles bulged with a power that felt ready to explode. His feet lengthened. Sharp, curved claws tore from his fingertips and sank easily into the mud. His spine arched and a tearing ache ripped across his shoulder blades. He gritted his teeth and endured it. A pair of enormous wings burst from his back. His neck lengthened, his face contorted, and his human features were replaced by a dragon's snout bristling with fangs. Who? He exhaled without thinking. 2 scorching streams of air licked from his nostrils, tasting faintly of sulfur and setting the falling pine needles alight. Tiny sparks danced between the gaps in his scales. My animagus? Is it actually a dragon? Dylan stood now as a magnificent Norwegian ridgeback. Thick, rough scales with serrated edges that caught the light, a broad, massive head, vertical slit pupils that flashed with a feral brilliance. His tail was a thick, spiked whip that could snap branches with a casual swing. He flexed a claw and felt the strange new structure of his body. He had read the Transfiguration texts, right up to Professor McGonagall's warnings that generally an animagus becomes a non-magical animal. Magical creatures follow different principles. Phoenixes could rebirth, dragons breathed fire. Those were abilities beyond what ordinary wizards could mimic safely. Transforming into a magical creature could cause unpredictable, dangerous conflicts between wizard magic and creature magic, even permanent damage. Most wizards thought it impossible, or at least inadvisable. And yet here he was, the magic guiding his animagus into a dragon. He would have stopped if he hadn't divined that it wouldn't bring catastrophic consequences. The books did say an animagus form often reflected the wizard's temperament, but how exactly did he resemble a dragon? High above, Norberta finally noticed the commotion and came circling down. She hovered cautiously, a curl of hot air puffing from her nostrils. When she saw Dylan, larger than herself, a puzzled expression flickered across her reptilian features. Then she roared. He roared back. Who are you? Fool! I'm your master. Dylan opened his maw and bellowed. Norberta answered in kind. Their exchange sounded ridiculous, but it somehow conveyed meaning between dragon and dragon. A burst of dark fiend fire spat from Dylan's mouth. Norberta scrambled with a flap of wings and dodged, eyes wide. The fire was not her softer flame, but a cruel, malicious burn reminiscent of the evil spells their bad master used. She stopped hesitating. Stop messing with me, master. I give up, she seemed to say, and landed not far from him. Then she paced up to him, sniffed, and with a flick of a claw admitted, How did you become like me? You're handsome. Coalball crept over next, elegant as ever, vertical pupils fixed on Dylan as she circled. Dylan beckoned with a claw, and the sleek cat leapt onto his scaled back. He felt his wings behind him, and though he'd mastered flying spells, wings were different. His first attempts were comically clumsy. 2 heavy flaps produced a whoosh, and he barely lifted. Coalball clung to his swaying back. Norberta laughed, a low, throaty sound, and Dylan scowled. You dare laugh? Where were you when you couldn't fly and fell on me? The little ridgeback shrugged, and with the insolence of youth, turned her back and demonstrated. She ran for momentum, then beat her wings powerfully and rode the updraft to rose into the sky. The wind she stirred lifted burnt brown leaves into a dragon-shaped scatter that tumbled against Dylan's own wing membranes as he followed her lead. On his third proper attempt, his wing membranes sliced the air with a keening scream, and the trees trembled. He was airborne, if wobbling. He nearly fell several times. Coalball dug her claws into his scales and mewed anxiously. Still, flying beside Norberta, Dylan felt a pride that swelled in his chest. This was his world, and it was getting bigger. Back on the forest floor, goblins and Cornish pixies cowered at the sight. Norberta alone had been intimidating enough. Now their cruel human captor had become a dragon too. They tucked themselves deeper into nests, terrified that even popping a head out would earn them capture. Dylan glanced at the silence in the trees and barely registered it. If the enchanted space expanded with the forest, he would deal with those problems when the time came. When he returned to human form, he felt the connection to his wand was somehow tighter. He couldn't shake a curiosity. Why had his animagus become a dragon? He thought of Dumbledore. Perhaps the headmaster had been an animagus himself, a secret, perhaps even taken a magical form, or maybe Dumbledore had hidden such things deliberately. Could a wizard have ancestors of magical creatures? The textbook said no. The origin of wizards didn't explain bloodlines with dragons. Still, the possibility lingered. What if bloodline played a role? He didn't want to tell anyone. Professor McGonagall would institute tests, and Dylan preferred to be the one doing the studying. He pulled out a notebook and recorded everything. How the dragon's fire seemed not the product of an internal organ. That dragon magic was an innate creature ability, but could mesh with fiend fire. If so, this might be the first time in the world a magical creature's ability and wizard magic had fused. He closed the notebook, clenching his hands. Even as a human, power thrummed through him like a war drum. He felt that something of the dragon remained inside him. Impulse struck. He walked to a clearing, closed his eyes, and summoned the dragon magic he'd felt when transformed. Even in human form, he sensed the power gathering. He opened his eyes and with a soft parting of his lips sent forth a scorching tongue of flame that stabbed skyward, a twisting, evil-seeming column of heat and destruction, 40 or 50 feet long. The air shimmered with the heat and the scene delighted him. "I'm a human dragon," he thought, grinning. He grasped his wand and guided the still-burning tongue as if it were a tamed beast. He pointed at a large tree, and the blaze lunged. The trunk collapsed into orange and embers in an instant, smoke nodding into the sky. A goblin skittered away from the tree and vanished deeper into the forest. Even without fiend fire, a dragon's breath is stronger than incendio, Dylan decided. To match it might require lumos solum, which demanded far more power. This breath could be used silently right in front of anyone. He felt pleased and for a moment exhilarated at the thought of the possibilities. A day later, he returned Tom Riddle's diary to Harry. "Sorry, I found nothing," he said, removing the Imperio he'd placed on it. The diary, a fragment of Voldemort's soul in his student days, had been utterly powerless against Dylan's Imperio. That evening, after practice in his suitcase space, Dylan checked the accumulated achievement rewards he'd collected. Most were trivial, and after becoming a dragon, some of them seemed redundant. One, however, stood out. Achievement: I am the homeowner. Do you know who the homeowner is? It's me. Requirement: own a property that is completely yours. Reward: magic array, ghostly, ghostlation. At midnight's strongest yin, gather graveyard phosphorescence, powdered bat fang, old shroud fibers, and the charred, powdered remains of biological limbs scorched by fiend fire. Mix and seal in a crystal ball, bury it under the door of the house, recite the shaping spell, and the array forms. Ability: once activated, the array automatically weaves the ghostly enchantment. The house becomes shrouded in dense, invisible ghostly energy. When enemies approach, that energy takes shape as vicious spirits that assault and bite the homeowner's attackers. Note: the ghostly energy disrupts enemy spellcasting, causing their magic to falter and weaken. Dylan read the description and snorted. Summoning malicious spirits didn't exactly scream, "me." He imagined a holy light ward might have felt more fitting. Still, the array was useful, a set-and-forget defensive enchantment. He was waiting on Gringotts for the final paperwork to complete the property handover. Then he climbed into his suitcase space to keep practicing animagus control and flying. The mood at Hogwarts brightened a bit that fortnight. Professor Sprout had good news. The mandrakes were almost out of infancy, meaning Professor Snape could brew restorative potions again. That calmed the students substantially, at least as far as fear of being rendered helpless. The rumored monster that could petrify people still worried them in close quarters, but the general anxiety eased. At breakfast, Neville sat beside Dylan, picking at his steak with no appetite. "Since the Christmas holidays, I've felt my right eyelid twitching," he fretted. "When you said a twitch meant fortune or misfortune, was it you who said left twitch means wealth and right means disaster?" Dylan popped a cherry tomato into his mouth and chewed slowly. "When did I say that?" "When we first met. I lost Lifu a few times and you found him. After that, I was scared of losing him, and my right eyelid kept twitching. You said that." "Oh, right," Dylan said, smiling. "You remember better than you think." Neville brightened. It felt like divination. They watched Harry and Ron across the table. Everyone still felt subdued since Hermione's attack. Neville lowered his voice. "They've seemed really down since then." "It makes sense to worry about friends," Dylan said, and Neville nodded solemnly. Valentine's Day arrived, and the Great Hall had been transformed into something more like a wedding venue than a school dining hall. Pink growth charms bloomed massive flowers along the walls, sweet scents thick in the air. Heart-shaped confetti drifted down from the enchanted ceiling, fluttering into every corner and settling even on the food. Dylan stared at his bowl of porridge speckled with pink hearts and thought, for perhaps the first time, Lockhart had outdone himself. "Did he do this?" Neville asked. Dylan's eyelid twitched. Who else could it be? He studied the enchantments. Everything was too coordinated for one show-off to manage alone. Professor Flitwick, at the staff table, looked tired and not entirely pleased. Dylan had seen enough to know Lockhart couldn't have executed such large-scale, flawless charms by himself. Hagrid had explained something like this to him, and Neville a few days earlier when they'd gone to fetch compost and check on the mandrakes. Hagrid had been talking about why the Defense Against the Dark Arts post was cursed. In the past decades, no professor had lasted more than a year there. Something always happened. Dumbledore had had to beg reputable graduates to return and teach, but none stayed on into a second year. The position, Hagrid said bluntly, had been cursed by Voldemort. Neville shivered at that thought. Dylan watched Lockhart prance in front of the staff table, bright and loud, the center of attention. The spectacle made even Harry and Ron smile, if only for a moment, but Dylan knew better than to believe it was all Lockhart. Whatever the truth, Hogwarts had 100 small hands pushing things into place these days, and that thought made him feel both wary and strangely reassured. Chapter 149. Only children make choices. I want them all. Everyone, I must say this here. Happy Valentine's Day. Lockhart's heart-shaped bow tie caught the glow of the enchanted candles and gleamed like corpse wax. His voice ricocheted through the great hall, tales of sound colliding between the stone pillars and startling the carved reliefs in the walls. Dylan watched, privately amazed that anyone could have the nerve and the taste to wear such bright clothes. With that sort of confidence, not even Voldemort could easily snatch his soul. If Lockhart had been Defense Against the Dark Arts last year, instead of Quirrell, perhaps there would have been fewer disasters. Dylan even entertained the thought. If Voldemort really had possessed Lockhart, could he have stood the narcissism? The idea made him smile. Lockhart had dragged Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick up to the front of the staff table. Neither could give him a cold shoulder. They weren't Severus Snape, so they plastered on stiff smiles for the students' sake. Brows slightly furrowed, eyelids tense, nostrils flared, mouths pulled into a thin line. Snape, by contrast, didn't even stand. He remained seated, his brows carved into hard grooves, his entire presence icily forbidding. Dylan thought it looked even sterner than when he'd once put shrinking solution in Professor Snape's cauldron by mistake. Snape's disdain for Lockhart was in a different league, and his look made it clear he considered Lockhart perhaps the least competent man he'd ever met. To date, 46 people have sent me cards, and I wish to express my gratitude. For this, I have specially decorated the Great Hall, and I hope my arrangements will surprise you all," Lockhart cried, flourishing his arms. He clapped, then announced, "Next, let us bring forth the friendly little cupids, bearing cards." Several doors behind the entrance hall creaked open. 12 goblins shuffled out, each looking miserable. They wore white cloths and had golden wings strapped to their backs. Each carried a harp that seemed far too heavy for them. Dylan glanced once and quickly looked away. The sight was genuinely unpleasant. Give them a warm round of applause, everyone. They'll be delivering Valentine's cards to you today. Colleagues, I'm sure you'll be very willing to participate. First up, why not ask Professor Snape to teach you how to brew a love potion? Dylan bared his teeth at the sight of Lockhart grinning at the faculty table, while Snape looked murderous. Are you not afraid of dying? He thought. Snape's expression darkened further. Dylan had no idea if anyone would actually go to Snape, but if they did, he reckoned there was a 99% chance they'd be seized, refined, and boiled into a potion in a cauldron, and a 1% chance they'd be hit by an Avada Kedavra. Either outcome would be final. Ho ho ho. Lockhart laughed, then added a friendly alternative. Perhaps Professor Snape is hard to approach, so you might seek Professor Flitwick for illusion work instead. I doubt there's anyone better at it than he is. Truly a cunning old fellow. Ho ho ho. Flitwick blinked and lowered his head ever so slightly, looking as though the merriment was an unexpected burden. Dylan could have sworn he saw 2 words on the swirl of Flitwick's hair. It's over. The other professors looked as grim as they felt, and only Dumbledore seemed amused. He sat serenely, as if enjoying the show and curious to see whether any professor would actually carry out Lockhart's suggestions. Breakfast was a rushed affair. Everyone ate quickly and dispersed to their classes, trying to avoid those sad excuse for cupids. The goblins, grotesque in their costumes, didn't stay put. They kept going in and out of classrooms, forcing cards into students' hands and croaking the contents of the cards aloud, sometimes even breaking into song while plucking at their harps. It was a noisy, miserable morning for nearly everyone. Professors complained but couldn't attack them. Dylan, not wanting to draw attention, transformed his classroom door into an iron one the moment a goblin shuffled in and tried to get past. The door became so heavy it would take 10 people to move. When Professor Flitwick noticed the blocked goblin, he sighed with relief. Dylan, apologizing for performing transfiguration in another professor's class, received a warm dismissal. How could that be a problem? Flitwick said, waving a hand. You did very well. Use the spell whenever necessary. He looked genuinely pleased, almost ready to award Gryffindor 10 points, but then decided that would be an odd reward for merely blocking goblins. After class, Neville, sitting beside Dylan, could barely hide his happiness and gave him a thumbs up. It's really you. Dylan smiled and opened his textbook, jotting notes while listening. Time passed. Without Hermione's usual companionship, April slipped in quietly. Nothing major happened at school in that time, but Dylan's studies kept him busier than ever. He received a letter from Gringotts asking him to call in to sign over property documents. Afterward, the goblins would wipe their own memories. Dylan decided to postpone the trip until summer. He had too much to do. The house would still be there, and until he accepted it, the goblins couldn't fulfill their commission. The goblin contract was binding, and he trusted it. He was reading and researching constantly. Library books, spells at various levels, connections between magics, potions, and the testing of new spell ideas on willing subjects. Inspiration came fast and had to be recorded. Sometimes an idea would spill out of him so quickly he could hardly stop writing. He accepted that he'd have to read more and shore up his foundation. Research led to more questions. New directions required broader knowledge. He also made sure to practice flying Norberta, his Norwegian ridgeback, every day. Since he could take dragon form and fly with her, their sessions had become joyful. Norberta grew more affectionate after he transformed. Life was full and busy until the Easter holiday. Quidditch training ramped up, and professors loaded students with homework. The campus felt safer. No more Chamber of Secrets attacks had been reported. Professor Sprout brought encouraging news. If the mandrakes were repotted one more time, they'd be mature. Once Snape brewed the restorative potion, petrified victims could be restored. The mandrakes hadn't eaten anyone in the few attack incidents, and students' fear had lessened. Rumors still flew. Some whispered the monster might be only the size of a booger, but when Harry hinted it might be a basilisk, he refused to say more, and the rumor didn't take off. With the end of the year approaching, second years had to choose their electives for third year. The common rooms buzzed with worried students poring over course lists, anxious about picking the wrong or too difficult subjects. Many sought advice from friends, older students, and relatives. Those born into wizarding families had the advantage of guidance. Dylan didn't worry. He'd already decided only children make choices. He wanted them all. He intended to take every elective in his third year. That would normally create timetable conflicts for most students, but Dylan had a plan. If he was enrolled in all 4 electives, he'd have a solid reason to request a time turner from Professor McGonagall. In the original story, Hermione used that route. Unfortunately, she was still in the hospital wing. Dylan wondered if Hermione would panic when she woke and found months of classes missed. But for now, he had other worries, the curriculum and the shortage of time. He also wondered why Hogwarts didn't just buy mature mandrakes externally if their own weren't ready. It suggested to him that Hogwarts might be short on funds, tuition barely covered board and lodging, and the Board of Governors or ministry funding might have been curtailed. Otherwise, why not buy a few mature plants to brew the potion and treat those already attacked? Questions about petrification nagged at him. When someone is petrified, are they as good as dead, or is their body simply frozen at the exact moment of petrification? He wanted to experiment. He was keen to find suitable test subjects and follow any clues. If Tom recovered and faced Harry with the basilisk, Dylan planned to try to take the basilisk and the Horcrux at once. Dylan, my grandmother says the electives aren't easy. What do you think I should choose? Neville asked as they walked toward the Great Hall after class, clutching a stack of letters. Dylan kept giving short answers. He was busy and distracted by new ideas popping into his head. Neville, aware of Dylan's schedule, tried not to take too much of his time, but he couldn't help asking. Each elective has its merits, Dylan said. Learn something you're interested in. If you're not interested, don't pick it. It's that simple. Neville grew more anxious. But I'm not interested in any of them. I don't want to learn any of them. Dylan hid a smile. Neville didn't need those skills for any special job. He ended up taking over the herbology post from Professor Sprout in later years. Dylan suggested divination as an easy option. Divination is subjective. If you don't have the talent, you can't really be blamed, and professors are unlikely to fail you. Neville brightened immediately. Really? I'll choose divination then. He ticked it on his form. Harry and Ron, who were still undecided, also looked to Dylan and quietly penciled in divination. Percy had chosen every elective. Neville wondered what Percy planned to do. Dylan shrugged. Maybe he wants to become a career lackey, he offered, and then denied he knew. Percy had told them to choose based on future ambitions. The others simply picked what appealed, with divination among them. Finally, the course selection was done. Quidditch training got more intense. Wood was up earlier than Dylan to push Harry. Dylan, however, needed adequate sleep to function. He persuaded Wood that starting training at 6 or 7 would be more effective than an exhausting pre-dawn session. Wood agreed, and Dylan stopped running into him first thing in the morning. On the last day before the Quidditch match, Dylan was in the library and later at the Room of Requirement practicing spells. Back in the dormitory, he found Harry rummaging through his things, frantic. Tom Riddle's diary was missing. Harry's belongings had been searched. The diary had gone. Dylan raised an eyebrow. If the diary was gone, the attacks would likely start again, and the Quidditch match would be canceled. He was right. When the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff teams flew out onto the pitch, with Madam Hooch about to blow her whistle, Professor McGonagall rushed over and called the match off. Match canceled, she announced, projecting her voice with a sonorous charm. The stands erupted in disbelief. Players and spectators clamored, but McGonagall's tone was grave. All students, return to your common rooms immediately. All prefects, lead your housemates away at once. She strode to Harry, seized his hand, and led him away. Ron followed, bewildered. Dylan had been in the library. He'd anticipated trouble and had stayed away from the pitch. However, Madam Pince had started clearing the library, effectively kicking people out. With no choice, Dylan packed and left. The castle was full of commotion. As he reached the Gryffindor common room, Neville, sent back from the pitch, came running up to him, breathless and panicked. Dylan, Professor McGonagall stopped the match. Has something happened to someone? Is the monster from the Chamber of Secrets back? Is it true it's a basilisk and it eats people? Dylan, calm, shrugged. There aren't many creatures that petrify people. A basilisk is one of them. It's definitely possible. Neville's face went pale. Inside the common room, Seamus was waiting and looked worse than anyone. It's bad. Something terrible's happened, Neville blurted. What? What is it? Seamus nearly shouted, My amulet. My amulet's gone. Maybe the monster was aiming for me and the amulet protected me. Dylan's lips twitched. What kind of amulet? Neville groped inside his robe, relieved to find his own amulet intact. Seamus, meanwhile, explained, It was an amulet the Weasley twins sold me. I heard it's very effective. Dylan was stunned. Don't you know the amulets the twins sell have spells I put on them? He blurted. To his surprise, Seamus nodded vigorously. That's why I bought one. I thought the spells you cast must be really powerful. Dylan opened his mouth and then shut it. He had no idea what to say. Was everyone now treating him like some sort of saint who distributed blessings? Even more baffling, Neville chimed in. Last time, someone said the Weasleys' amulets were fake, but they demonstrated the amulet's power and said Dylan made them. As soon as people heard that, they went mad and all ran to buy amulets from the Weasleys. Huh? Chapter 150, Mnemosynovail. Dylan figured that because the basilisk hadn't attacked again in the past few days, the students were no longer so terrified of the Chamber of Secrets, and so the Weasley twins' charms weren't selling like they had been. They hadn't come to him lately asking for more. Still, they had managed to sell a few earlier and eventually handed Dylan half the proceeds. To be honest, he no longer cared much for a few thousand galleons. He almost refused them, but the Weasleys insisted it was his rightful share. With a shrug, he pocketed the coins. He could not, for the life of him, understand why so many people bought the charms. The twins were simply brilliant at selling a story. Even Seamus and Neville, who had seen him cast spells on a few of the charms, seemed to have been convinced. It was unnerving. At that moment, Professor McGonagall hurried in, flanked by Harry and Ron. Children, she said, voice tight, another student has been attacked, but not from our house. It's Penelope Clearwater from Ravenclaw. The common room fell into a tight, anxious silence. McGonagall stood surrounded by students, face grave. When she confirmed another attack, there was a collective intake of breath and a murmur that spread like a chill. The monster in the Chamber of Secrets had struck again. McGonagall let her gaze sweep the room. I don't know how much anyone here understands about what is happening, she said solemnly. But if you have any information connected to these attacks, you must come forward. Although the victims can be restored with mandrake draughts, if we cannot catch whoever is responsible, anyone at the school could be next. She paused, sorrow deepening her features. Worse, if these attacks continue, Hogwarts may be forced to close until this is resolved. The idea that the school might shut down sent the Gryffindors into uproar. Close the school? How can that be? Someone demanded. They get healed with mandrakes. Why close everything? Another student countered. Even if they can be healed, what if the monster starts killing people outright? So many attacks. Who can guarantee the next one will survive long enough for a mandrake to take effect? The mood grew heavier. No one offered any useful information. McGonagall's gaze lingered on Dylan a moment, but he said nothing, so she shook her head. Please, if you know anything, tell me immediately. She turned and left, and the students continued to argue. These recent attacks hit Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, even nearly hit the Gryffindor ghost, someone muttered. But no one from Slytherin. Lee Jordan, standing next to the Weasley twins, scowled. The chamber could only be opened by someone from Slytherin. They're targeting the rest of us. Why is the professor asking us for clues? They should kick all the Slytherins out. Exactly, the twins agreed, and the rest of the Gryffindors eagerly joined in, blaming Slytherins for everything. Harry and Ron rallied to the crowd too, trying to glean any new tidbits. Seeing McGonagall depart, Dylan, who had no patience for a riot of children, turned toward the dormitory. Neville and Seamus exchanged looks and trailed after him. If Harry and the others wouldn't go back to the common room, they figured, better to stick with Dylan. It felt safer. Back in the dormitory, the two boys emptied trunks, pulled out every charm they owned, and strapped them on. Dylan smirked at their nervous fussing. Don't panic. That monster always attacks when no one's around. That's obvious. Obvious what? Neville and Seamus blinked. It's obvious the monster avoids the professors, Dylan said, settling at the desk and opening a book. If it dared show up in front of McGonagall or Dumbledore, it'd get beaten senseless. Neville hesitated, then asked, "What about you, Dylan? What if it comes after you?" Dylan glanced back. "Then I'll make it wish it had never been born." The boys, hearing his calm confidence, felt strangely reassured. Is that what security felt like? That thought carried them to bedtime. When Harry and Ron returned, Neville half wanted to cling to Dylan. "I'm really scared I'll be attacked while I'm sleeping," he said. "Could you put protective spells on our dorm? Make it like a copper wall, an iron fortress, so nothing can get in?" Dylan watched Neville tug at his pajamas and smooth the covers. "You're overdoing it. To get into the Gryffindor dormitory, you need to get past the fat lady's portrait. Without the password, neither the heir nor that monster can get in." Neville's worry persisted. But if the heir catches a Gryffindor and forces them to give the password, then he could get in. That was a fair point. Dylan sighed and rubbed his head. "Fine. I'll strengthen the defenses on our dormitory door and the walls." Neville relaxed and crawled into bed, tucking himself in like a caterpillar. Dylan sighed at how brave the boy pretended to be and then waved his wand, quietly reinforcing the room. "Should I seal the dorm completely? Nobody in or out until the magic wears off?" "Until it wears off or you lift it," Dylan amended. "No," Harry sat bolt upright. "What if we need to go to the bathroom in the night? We'd be trapped." Ron joined in. "Yeah, who's going to wake you up, Dylan? If we wake you and you're grumpy, you'll—" Ron flailed. Dylan shot a look that made Ron choke and backpedal. "Isn't that a bit much? I wouldn't turn you into a toilet." "Isn't that the same thing?" Ron wailed. Neville blinked, glanced between Ron and Dylan, and then cautiously agreed that maybe a full seal wasn't the best idea. "Use another protective enchantment. I trust you can keep the monster out without sealing us in." Dylan suppressed the urge to turn them into literal urinals. He cast a few modest wards, then lay down and pulled the covers up. Nothing happened that night. No one was attacked. Neville insisted it must have been Dylan's spells that kept everyone safe, and despite Dylan's reasonable explanation, the rumor spread. Before long, nearly half of Gryffindor came to him each night, begging for protections. The Weasley twins smelled a business opportunity. Knowing Dylan wouldn't want to spend all his time making wards, they proposed buying charms from him en masse and selling them, offering him an extra 10%, so he'd take 60% of the price outright. The twins would handle the making, hawking, and even keeping the crowds from blocking Dylan's door. Dylan agreed. He was glad to make life easier for the Weasleys after they'd taken him in for half a summer, and the money was a welcome plus. With the twins handling the sales, fewer students bothered him at the dormitory. He could get on with his other work. April passed. Dylan had become skilled at transforming into a Norwegian ridgeback. His flying steadied, and his spell research advanced. The obsidian recovery potion, which had been difficult to refine, began to improve thanks to the acromantula in the Forbidden Forest. When Dylan took Norberta to visit Hagrid, he sometimes hunted acromantulas. Their bodies yielded obsidian flowers, and the larger hosts produced better quality ingredients. Dylan had also spent most of his remaining galleons expanding the extra-dimensional space in his suitcase. Everything was moving forward. Only his Expecto Patronum showed no progress, which puzzled and annoyed him. He had mastered the spell, so why couldn't he improve it? Lately, his research focus had shifted toward that problem. Then summer brought a string of bad news. The attacks from the chamber suddenly increased in frequency. Colin Creevey was petrified again. Worse, Hagrid was taken into custody. The ministry suspected him of involvement in the petrifications, an accusation dragging in events from 50 years ago. For Dylan, the immediate issue was practical. With Hagrid removed, Norberta's food now fell to him to prepare. He was not worried that Hagrid's memories might reveal Norberta or him. Over recent research, he had mastered the Imperious Curse at an advanced level and had significantly improved his legilimency and occlumency. His proficiency with the Fidelius charm was also high. Drawing on those studies, he had crafted a new spell, Mnemosyne Veil. Mnemosyne Veil created an invisible mental barrier in Hagrid's mind, isolating memories that involved Dylan. The veil cloaked those memories so that, whether interrogated with veritaserum, probed by legilimency, or pressured with threats or bribes, Hagrid could not reveal them. No one could perceive or read those shielded recollections, unless Dylan lifted the veil himself. Only then would the hidden memories return and be available to Hagrid again. Dylan had been inspired by the magical contract he signed with the goblins when he acquired his house. The contract's binding force had suggested new ways to weave protection into minds. Buying that house had not been a loss after all. It had given him not only a home, but ideas for new magics. As if the petrifications and Hagrid's arrest weren't enough, there was another blow. Lucius Malfoy used his influence on the Board of Governors to force the temporary suspension of Dumbledore's authority. With Dumbledore gone from active leadership, fear at Hogwarts climbed to near hysteria. Spring warmed into summer, but the light could not thaw the cold that had settled in the castle. Without Dumbledore in command, the corridors filled with small clusters of students hurrying along with their heads down, eyes darting into shadow. Everyone moved in pairs or threes, footsteps quick, nerves raw, afraid a monster might step out of the darkness and into their path. Chapter 151, Old Deng's Warning. What did he know? Dylan, have you heard? Malfoy and his lot are bullying people again. After dinner, Neville walked beside Dylan. Lately, he'd been shadowing Dylan almost constantly. Unless Dylan said he needed to be alone, Neville followed him everywhere. Which house? Since Headmaster Dumbledore had been temporarily removed from his post by Lucius, Malfoy had grown brazen. He was almost unrestrained. Still, he was a spoiled brat. No matter how loud he got, he wasn't that dangerous. Neville's bullying was mostly just cornering someone and saying nasty things like, "Hey, Hufflepuff, all that hard work won't change your mediocrity. You'll be expelled soon." Or, "You Ravenclaw, think you're clever? Don't get in the way. Watch out for the monsters." The worst might be, "A bunch of idiots who only have courage. Next Quidditch match, you Slytherins are going to wet yourselves." To Dylan, this was child's play. It wasn't even half as intimidating as Professor Snape. It was almost refreshing. Malfoy was like an awkward top student learning how to bully. Good grades, bad manners. "It was a Hufflepuff," Neville said, smacking his lips. A student brushed his robe by accident, turning a corner, and Malfoy grabbed him and bullied him for a while. "Did Malfoy use any spells? Curses?" Dylan asked casually. Neville thought a moment, then shook his head. "Doesn't seem like it, but I heard Malfoy shouted until the Hufflepuff cried." Children today had thin skins, Dylan thought, remembering the brutal bullying he'd seen in his previous life. He shook his head slightly. "When we get back to the dorm, I'm going to read. You can stay there, do whatever. I'll be in the suitcase. Send for me if anything happens." Neville nodded eagerly. "I'll stay in the dormitory. I won't go anywhere." Professor Sprout hadn't been asking Neville to help in the greenhouses recently, and the whole school felt tense. After class, if Dylan had nothing to do, Neville walked him back to the dormitory. Not just Neville, most students did the same. McGonagall and Flitwick had been asking students not to wander the castle and, when not in class, to remain in their dormitories. With Dumbledore taken away, Dylan's after-class tutoring was disrupted. Aside from Snape, McGonagall and Flitwick had largely postponed their sessions with him. That meant Dylan hadn't had the chance to verify some of his ideas with them. He hadn't expected Dumbledore's transfer to affect his tutoring. He hadn't planned on seeking Dumbledore's counsel anyway. Still, losing time with McGonagall and the others was a mild annoyance. On the bright side, he was busy enough that reduced meetings gave him more time to read. "When Karthus shows up, I'll make that little Tom know what it's like to have his butt blossom," Neville muttered under his breath. They just returned to the dorm when Neville went to the restroom and Harry and Ron, who had already arrived, hurried over. "Dylan, we want to ask you something," Harry whispered. "What is it?" Dylan looked up. "Divination," Ron blurted. "We want you to tell us if Harry and I will be in danger when we go into the Forbidden Forest tonight." "Oh, you're going to the forest. What do you want to know exactly?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Will we encounter danger? Will the trip go smoothly?" Harry asked, frowning. Dylan blinked, his gaze drifting for a moment. Old Deng, Dumbledore, had been transferred, but he hadn't gone off to the Ministry. The transfer order only suspended his duties. It didn't say where he should go next. Right now, old Deng was staying in the Forbidden Forest, probably with nothing to do, and therefore training with dangerous creatures. Going from running the school to practicing magic in the forest would only polish the man into something more formidable. Lucius thought he'd tied old Deng's hands, but really he'd forced wizards to stop saying Merlin and start saying Old Deng. Ever since Hagrid had been taken, Dylan had avoided the forest. He didn't want old Deng to find traces of him, nor Berta, the unicorns, things he'd done there. What old Deng was doing in the forest, whether he was training with creatures, wasn't Dylan's concern. Dylan, did you divine anything? Harry and Ron watched Dylan's unfocused face, thinking he was already seeing things. But Dylan didn't move for a long moment. Both boys grew anxious. Dylan licked his lips, blinked back to attention, and chuckled. Don't worry. You won't meet any true danger. Just be careful of spiders. Spiders? Harry and Ron both breathed easier at first, then their hearts dropped. You mean? Harry began. Dylan nodded. Acromantulas, Hagrid's spiders. They've been multiplying in the Forbidden Forest. Ron went pale. The very sight of an acromantula could terrify someone. They'd meet these on their trip? Please no. Would they be eaten? Harry looked at Ron's terrified face, swallowed, and said, Maybe I should go alone. You stay in the dorm, Ron. No way. We agreed to go together. A Gryffindor doesn't leave his mate to face those horrible long-legged monsters alone. Ron, though shaken, insisted on going. Dylan smiled a little. Don't worry. I predict you won't be in real danger. If you can control your fear, those spiders are just little cuties. They could be useful. Their bodies could yield obsidian flowers, their venom and organs made for potions, or could be sold. Cute was Dylan's brand of affection. Oh my goodness, Dylan, what are you saying? Ron looked shocked. This was the first time Dylan seemed a little terrifying to him. Who could call an acromantula cute? He must be mad. Dylan shrugged. All right, I have to get busy. You two should go tonight. And remember, don't mention my name in the Forbidden Forest. Why? Harry asked. Does your name summon them? Ron's face went even paler, lips trembling. Who knows? Dylan stared at Ron until the boy was nearly in tears, then opened his suitcase and climbed inside. See you tomorrow. Bring good news. After Dylan left, Ron felt as if his energy had been drained. Harry, he said weakly. Harry scratched his head. Dylan was probably just trying to scare you. People like to do that. Ron buried his face in his pillow. This is really going to haunt me. Dylan didn't leave his suitcase until late. His parents had sent more money recently, only a few thousand galleons, not a fortune, and he hadn't had time to go to Gringotts. He still had enough galleons on hand, though. He used some to expand the space inside his suitcase and to activate new functions, improving its capabilities. He'd transformed into a Norwegian ridgeback earlier and flown for a while, which drained his stamina. He practiced spells, picked a few obsidian flowers, and studied obsidian recovery potion for a while. Tired in body and mind, he cast a scouring charm on himself and fell asleep. The suitcase's animal space had grown, and though it didn't hold many creatures, Coleball and Norberta played happily inside. Dylan no longer insisted on holding Coleball when he slept. He let them roam the space freely. When he woke, Harry and Ron were already back. They'd probably not slept at all. Their spirits brightened when they saw Dylan awake. Ron sat up on his damp pillow, voice whispering, trembling with emotion. Dylan, I nearly died last night. I was almost food for those acromantulas. Harry, exhausted, leaned against the headboard. There were at least 200. It was hundreds, each of them 15 feet tall. Ron raised his voice a bit. As soon as they saw me, it was like I'd killed their whole family. They all went mad for me. Neville and Seamus were still asleep, so Ron kept his volume controlled. Dylan glanced at Ron's soaked pillow and pursed his lips. Was he scared to death? He clicked his tongue and teased gently. Maybe. You just look like asking to be eaten. Ron was speechless. Dylan cast a silencing charm on Neville's and Seamus's bed so he wouldn't wake them, then said, Anyway, you two are fine, right? I told you you'd come back safely. Harry nodded. Dylan was right. The trip was rough, but we weren't eaten and we weren't hurt. Who says? Ron protested. Now the word acromantula makes me shiver. I must have suffered brain damage. Dylan laughed. I know a cure for trauma. Want to try it? Ron, hopeful for a moment, then remembered Dylan's mischief and waved it away. Never mind, I'll be fine after I calm down. He sniffled, rubbed his red eyes, and lay back. Dylan had something on the tip of his tongue, but saw Ron was subdued and swallowed it. "Did you get anything useful from the forest?" he asked. Harry nodded. Before he could answer, Ron cut in. "Hagrid's pet!" He immediately snorted snot in the middle of the sentence, panic flailed for a tissue, and Dylan, unbothered, cleaned him up with a quick wand flick and a vanishing charm. "Of course not," Dylan said dryly. Ron's face flushed with embarrassment, and Harry nearly burst laughing. When he regained composure, he spoke seriously. "Aragog says Hagrid didn't open the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago. The person who died was a girl. We think it might be Myrtle, the girl in the second-floor bathroom." "A bold guess. Go verify it." Dylan nodded. "Anything else?" Harry hesitated, then said, "Aragog said the acromantulas were so aggressive because someone's been hunting them in the forest lately." "That's why they attack humans now," Ron added, eyes fixed on Dylan. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Someone's hunting acromantulas? That's illegal." Harry looked at him. "It wasn't you, was it, Dylan? Aragog said that whoever's doing it is skilled with the unforgivable curses." Ron had stopped crying and now stared at Dylan. "Why would you think that? I'm busy. I don't have time for that." "And the unforgivable curses? How would I?" Dylan started, then Harry said, "Professor Dumbledore called me in once and told me you might be dangerous. He asked me to watch you." Dylan narrowed his eyes. "Why would the headmaster say that?" "I don't know. Maybe because you learn magic so quickly," Harry answered. Dylan studied Harry a moment, then smiled. "Thanks for telling me, but I'm not dangerous. The headmaster might fear I'd slap you half to death if you provoked me." He let the last point hang, neither denying nor confirming mastering such curses. When Harry heard Dylan's ambiguous answer, he naturally interpreted it as, "I'm not the one hunting acromantulas with unforgivable curses." Harry breathed easier. Dumbledore's warning about those curses had been stern. Those who used them were twisted. Dylan's sharp tongue didn't equal a twisted mind. So if someone is using unforgivable curses in the forest, who could it be? That's right next to Hogwarts. Ron put forward the obvious suspicion. "It's the hair of Slytherin. They let out the monster and attacked Hermione. Someone like that would know unforgivable curses." Harry nodded. "Maybe, but we can't tell Dumbledore this. It could make things messy. Maybe we should talk to Professor McGonagall?" Dylan shook his head. "Headmaster Dumbledore is probably in the Forbidden Forest right now. I don't think that person will keep targeting the acromantulas. If they were going to strike the forest again, they would have done it already. So you two should focus on how to catch the air in Hogwarts." Harry agreed. Dylan got out of bed, said goodbye, and left the dorm. Harry watched his retreating back, then clutched something and shoved it back under his pillow. On his way to the Owlery, Dylan's eyes narrowed. Was Old Deng starting to suspect him? Was Dumbledore saying those things because of Quirrell, thinking Dylan mastered dark arts and had something to do with Voldemort and Quirrell in the forest? Or did he suspect Dylan was the heir of Slytherin? Or was he suspecting Dylan's alternate identity? Dylan walked slowly, puzzling over which of his actions Old Deng might know about. Had Old Deng told Harry on purpose, knowing Harry couldn't keep it quiet, so he'd use Harry's mouth to warn Dylan? He fed Luna some premium meat strips at the Owlery and teased her a bit before heading to the Great Hall for breakfast. He thought about the Mirror of Erised. Last time he looked, his desires had seemed simple. He wasn't afraid Old Deng would see anything worrying if he looked into the mirror again. He'd heard Snape say that Old Deng had put the mirror back in his office. If he showed up at Old Deng's office and looked into the Mirror of Erised, and Old Deng saw nothing alarming, the headmaster might stop watching him. Dylan didn't want Old Deng to keep an eye on him. He also wondered about Quirrell. Quirrell had been host to Voldemort. Through the kind of parasitic possession Voldemort used, brutal and indifferent to the host's life, when the parasite withdrew, it would have taken most of the host's vitality. Even if they took Quirrell away, he shouldn't have survived long afterward. Dylan didn't fear Quirrell revealing him. So why had Old Deng used Harry to hint at Dylan? What did the headmaster know? Dylan frowned. He paused, an odd thought flaring across his face. I wonder if Lily's magic would rebound if I used a spell on Harry? Before Harry and Ron could dig any deeper into the rumors about the hair of Slytherin and the monster in the chamber, a practical problem forced itself on them. Final exams. The talk of Salazar Slytherin's heir and a lurking basilisk had been doing the rounds at Hogwarts for weeks, but that didn't mean the examinations were going to be postponed. The single-plank bridge of exams still had to be crossed. Unless they were attacked as early as Hermione had been and given an exemption, everyone had to sit for them. More importantly, because Hermione had been hit so early this time, Harry and Ron had been spending too much time chasing leads and fixing things. They were far behind in their studies. Hermione hadn't had to study at all. She didn't even have to take exams. But Harry and Ron couldn't rely on that. They'd planned to follow last year's study schedule, but with Hermione in the hospital wing and their regular planner out of action, it proved impossible. So they joined everyone else in the library, at least to look as if they were studying. Dylan was there as usual. He had his nose in a book as Harry and Ron sidled over. Dylan glanced up when Ron began. Dylan? Before Ron even finished, Dylan knew what nonsense was coming and shook his head. I don't need to revise. If you want a study plan, I don't really have one to hand over. Ron's face fell. There's just so much to go over. If I don't have a plan, I don't even know where to start. Harry, sitting beside him, pursed his lips. Ron had voiced what they were both thinking. Dylan had his elective Ancient Runes book open. He'd taken some interest in runes and planned to review in preparation for the class next year. Runes, he thought, had deep magical significance and might even harbor powerful magic. He'd been researching them for some time. For every subject, Dylan said calmly, do the assignments the professors set. They cover the essentials. Think of them as a standard study plan. He turned to the page he'd been reading. Learn to study independently instead of depending on others. If you fail a subject, the consequences can be serious. That hit home. Ron thought of the letter from home. Molly Weasley remembered everything and had made it plain at the start of term that if he failed a subject, he could expect a scorched posterior when he got back to the burrow. That fear was the main reason Ron had been chained to a library bench lately instead of wandering with Harry. He moaned, but at least now he had a direction. He fished out Flitwick's assignment book and tried to tackle charms. 2 pages in, he felt faint. Dylan, how do you manage so many different kinds of magic? Dylan raised an eyebrow and smiled. If you understand magic too rigidly, life gets dull. Ron blinked. Magic is magic. How can it be rigid or flexible? He changed tack. I can't figure what the professors are thinking. The headmaster's been expelled, Quidditch's finals were canceled, Slytherin's heir and a basilisk are somewhere out there. Hermione got attacked, and Professor McGonagall won't even give us a proper holiday. Doesn't she worry the basilisk might turn up during exams? Ron tapped the assignment book, barely looking at it, and then produced his wand, bandaged and wrapped with magic tape. And I still have to take exams with this broken thing. What if it explodes like last time? Then I'd lose points for sure. What would I tell Mum? I don't want to go home and get beaten. Then try to ace the written papers, Dylan suggested, sympathetic but unmoved. He wasn't a miracle worker. Harry, though, scratched his head and admitted, honestly, what did we even learn this year? I don't remember anything. Neville, who'd come in with Dylan, looked washed out from the pressure of the exams and the Chamber of Secrets. Still, unlike the boys, he could at least be confident about herbology. Professor Sprout had been letting him help in the greenhouses before Dumbledore was forced out, and he'd soaked up the subject matter. The good news reached them before exams began proper. The mandrakes were fully mature. That's great. Snape'll have the restorative potion ready in no time. Ron brightened at the dinner table, and Harry perked up too. Neville confirmed he'd been asked to help with the harvest, and Dylan volunteered to assist as well. The next morning, Dylan and Neville arrived at the greenhouse. Professor Sprout had been there early and looked pleased, though a little tired, with dark rings under her eyes. You're here? Wonderful. With you two, I think Professor Snape will be able to brew the Mandrake Restorative Draught tonight. She handed Neville and Dylan gloves and earplugs and set them to work. The greenhouse smelled damp and green. Dylan loosened the soil around a pot and lifted a mandrake. The moment it spotted him, it shuddered and stifled the scream. The little plant's ugly eyes trembled at his face, as if it remembered him. "I haven't used a spell on them," Dylan said to Neville. "Why do they look so afraid of me?" Neville chopped off the leaves with a practiced swing of the sickle. He'd done this part often enough. The mandrake's skin shriveled as if the top being lopped off stopped it breathing. From start to harvest, the plants had never been attractive. Ugly, uglier, dead ugly, Neville thought with a faint smile. Yet the two of them worked quickly and efficiently. Dylan didn't pocket anything. Hogwarts's plants were school property, and Professor Sprout was watching. When they had nearly finished, Sprout walked over with soil still on her hands. Dylan paused, removed his earplugs, and, under Neville's surprised stare, made a request. "Professor, I can brew the mandrake restorative draught. The first victim was saved by my potion. Could I take some of these mandrakes? I need them for other potion research as well." Neville nearly choked. The greenhouse's contents were supposed to be the school's. The last time he'd managed to get a pot of mandrakes for Dylan, it had been because he'd helped Sprout so much. But this time, Dylan had asked directly, and Sprout didn't hesitate. "Oh, certainly," she said breezily, brushing dirt from her fingers. "Once they mature, they're for the school's potion stock, but you can take a few. Your talent is excellent. I'd hate to hold you back. Neville has been a great help, too. I'm glad to teach him more." Neville was stunned into silence. Dylan collected 9 mandrake pots while Sprout chuckled. "Give some to Professor Snape so he can brew more draughts. That will calm everyone down." Dylan levitated the pots with a small spell and carried them out. Neville declined to come along. His part was done, and Dylan headed toward Snape's office. Partway there, he felt a presence brush past. He flicked his wand, and a rooster's crow echoed. The presence paused and retreated, a voice like a whisper saying, "Little one, don't rush. Soon you'll be able to grow freely in my forest." Dylan frowned but walked on, the 9 mandrakes trailing obediently beside him. Snape was bent over a cauldron when Dylan knocked. The pots floated into the office and settled like strange little totems. Snape's dark gaze flicked over them. "Are you planning to turn my classroom into a foul-smelling garden?" he asked. "No," Dylan said, smiling. "I can't store them right now." On the table were 2 cauldrons. Snape didn't pause. "Since you're here, you can brew the draught with me," he said, placing a second cauldron for Dylan. It was a command. Dylan moved to work. While they added ingredients together, Dylan tried to feel out Snape's thinking about the Chamber of Secrets and about Dumbledore's absence. Snape was almost imperceptibly tense. A bubble rose and popped in the brewing liquid. "Don't make me have to tell you not to spit into the cauldron," Snape muttered. "There aren't many mandrakes to waste." "You know my technique," Dylan answered. "Nothing will go wrong." Snape snorted. The potion took shape under their hands. After a moment, Snape's voice turned colder. "The restricted section is no place for a half-baked wizard like you. The contents of those books are beyond what you should be learning in depth right now." Dylan had not thought he could hide his restricted section visits. He'd accepted Madame Pince's register. Nothing he'd read had been purely evil, mostly theoretical, but he'd had no intention of sneaking. Still, Snape's remark hinted at outside knowledge. "I won't be seduced by dark magic," Dylan said quietly. "I study principles, not control." Snape watched him like a hawk. "Your occlumency is more advanced than I expected." Dylan smiled. "All thanks to your teaching, Professor." Snape's voice thinned. "Dumbledore wants me to take you under my wing again next year. I will need to know the dark arts you've researched." Dylan blinked in surprise, then brightened. He'd been exploring darker theory on his own, not expecting a professor to step forward to teach. It opened a new, unexpected road. "Be careful," Snape added, returning to the cauldron. "If you meet danger, use every spell you know without hesitation." "Understood," Dylan said, pleased. After a few more potions, Dylan checked the time. "I have a lesson with Professor McGonagall tonight." "Take 2 draughts with you," Snape said without looking up. Dylan's eyes lit. "Thank you, Professor." Snape's only reply was a curt tell to hurry away. Dylan stopped by the Great Hall for a quick meal and then went to McGonagall's office for his transfiguration lesson. They'd only been talking a short while when a letter fluttered in. McGonagall read it, and her face hardened. A real murder case at Hogwarts, she said, incredulous and angry. Who's spreading this now? Dylan took the paper on her offer and scanned it. It was short, a claim from the outside that a real murder had occurred at Hogwarts and that a student would be killed. Dylan frowned. This couldn't have been started by students. You mean, McGonagall looked at him. If someone's spreading this, they might be trying to cause trouble to become famous again, or they've been paid, Dylan said. McGonagall slammed her hand on her desk. Lockhart, she spat. Who else? Dylan shrugged. Who else would benefit? If it's false information, the only thing he gains is attention, unless he actually wants to kill someone, McGonagall finished, horrified. Dylan met her gaze. The suggestion hung in the air between them, impossible and terrible both. McGonagall's eyes widened. How dare he? She whispered. I'm not too sure about that. His brain usually doesn't work very well, Dylan said with a shrug. Professor McGonagall's eyelids twitched. That report about Lockhart wanting to kill someone is still unconfirmed. True, Dylan agreed. Maybe he's just spreading rumors. He couldn't think of any real connection between Lockhart and Tom, nor did he remember Lockhart giving anyone outside Hogwarts a heads up that a murder would happen here. This was stranger than he'd expected. Lockhart's a useful test subject, he added dryly. Don't let him make more trouble and ruin himself. It's hard to find someone with a little power, but not too much. Dylan stood. I think our after-class session should end here for today, Professor. Why don't you ask Professor Flitwick for his opinion first? McGonagall frowned. Flitwick's attitude was clear in his letter. He only told me to stay vigilant. We can't be sure Lockhart spread this news. Exactly, so we should be wary of Lockhart. Maybe we can keep an eye on him. McGonagall rose. I'll speak to Flitwick. They were about to leave when a dark shadow raced across the window and a sudden whooshing sound filled the office. With a crash, a scarlet howler slammed into the closed window, squeezed through a gap, and spun wildly around the room, shrieking in Professor Flitwick's high voice. McGonagall, something's wrong. Come at once. The howler's voice cut through the walls, making the enchanted books on the shelves tremble. Remember to bring Dylan. Snape wants him to come along. I think he means not to let Dylan go back to his dormitory alone. All right, I won't say more. Just come quickly. After a few more desperate cries, the howler fell silent and flopped onto the desk. McGonagall's face tightened. Something's happened, she said. Dylan's mouth twitched as he listened. So, Professor, what do we do now? Go to the staff room, McGonagall ordered. They moved fast. The staff room was already packed when they arrived. The atmosphere was grim and taut. Nearly every teacher was there. Snape stood apart, pressed against the wall in a threadbare black robe that looked older than whatever new one Dylan had offered him. His expression was icier than usual. When Dylan walked in, Snape's gaze cut over him like a blade. Dylan nodded curtly. Professor Sprout sat twisting at the corner of her robes, worry etched into her features. Flitwick, tiny and agitated, paced in quick, nervous circles, wiping at his forehead as if he were about to faint from stress. The rest of the staff turned as McGonagall entered. McGonagall, you're here, Flitwick cried, hurrying to meet her. What's happened? She demanded. A student, Flitwick's voice trembled. The heir of Slytherin has taken her. He's taken her to the Chamber of Secrets. Where did you get that? McGonagall asked sharply. Flitwick swallowed. He left another message. I saw it when I passed by. He lowered his voice. It said, her bones will lie in the Chamber of Secrets forevermore. For whose bones? McGonagall's eyes shot to him. Ginny Weasley, Madame Hooch said, leaning weakly on a chair back. The words landed like a physical blow. McGonagall's hands clenched. Dylan felt the gravity of it at once. We have to suspend the exams and send the students home tomorrow, he said. McGonagall breathed out, the worry deepening the lines at her eyes. Dylan realized his earlier plans would have to wait. Tonight, Harry and the others would almost certainly move. And Lockhart, what's he doing? Spreading news of a murder at school to the outside world. Could he have been bribed by Malfoy? Dylan muttered. Everyone glanced at Lockhart's name as if it could explain anything. McGonagall sighed. Maybe Hogwarts really should be closed, she said. Dumbledore always said. She stopped as the staff room door burst open. Lockhart swept in, all grin and gaudy robes, the same smug smile that made people's teeth itch. Oh, friends, are you all here? I hope I haven't missed the show. Dylan's eye twitched. He felt a hot, nameless irritation flare up and had to resist the urge to draw the wand from his sleeve. Snape's hand, where it rested at his side, had tightened too. Dylan let the feeling pass and waited. Snape moved away from the wall and stepped between Lockhart and McGonagall with a small, cold smile. Look, everyone, our savior has arrived. Lockhart blinked. I know you're all anxious, but don't worry. I'll rescue the kidnapped student from the Chamber of Secrets. What? Lockhart's grin faltered. He swallowed visibly. Me? I mean, one student being taken. This will affect Slytherin's reputation too. Dylan suppressed a snort. Slytherin's reputation? Snape's lip curled as he glanced at Dylan, then fixed Lockhart with an even, chilling look. We will entrust you with the rescue. You always speak as if you know the chamber's location. Now's your chance to prove it. Professor Sprout leaned forward. You told us at dinner you knew where the chamber was. You said you were confident you could deal with the monster. This is the moment. Flitwick, voice small and urgent, added, Attacks are continuing. Hagrid is not the one who opened the chamber, Lockhart. You said you regretted not dueling the creature Hagrid controlled. Here is your opportunity. Lockhart's bravado shrank. He forced a smile that trembled. I don't quite remember saying all that. I remember very clearly, Mr. Gilderoy, Snape said with a venomous calm. The school is in chaos. If Dumbledore had let you handle this from the beginning, perhaps you could have handled it beautifully. McGonagall's voice was steel. As deputy headmistress, I'm making arrangements on Dumbledore's behalf. Tonight, you will enter the Chamber of Secrets alone, rescue Ginny Weasley, and if possible, deal with the monster. Snape's smile widened just enough to show the edge of a threat. This is the glorious moment you've longed for, Mr. Lockhart. Lockhart visibly sagged against the wall, his swagger gone. He looked around for some way out, but every pair of eyes was on him, trust and expectation heavy in their gazes. He wanted someone else to volunteer. No one did. After a long pause, he straightened with shaky dignity. I would be honored to do it. I do have the ability. Ha ha ha! I'll go to my office to make preparations and return shortly. He bolted through the door faster than he'd entered. Once he was gone, McGonagall's jaw tightened. She had no intention of relying entirely on Lockhart. Waiting for him to rescue Ginny felt like waiting for the impossible. Right now, everyone, patrol the castle. Make sure no student is lingering in the corridors, she ordered. Heads of houses, tell your students the Hogwarts Express will leave in the morning. No more students can be at risk. The staff rose as one, teachers transforming their fear into action. Dylan, come with me. I'll take you back to your dormitory, McGonagall said, taking his hand. Dylan slipped his hand into hers and let her lead him away. As they passed through the portrait door, Harry and Ron, cloaked and watching from a shadowed corner, exhaled in relief when they saw Dylan and McGonagall leave together. That's odd. Did Dylan see us? Ron whispered. Impossible. The cloak works on professors, Harry said, but his voice was hurried. We have to move. They took my sister. Ron pushed off into the corridor. Harry hesitated, the invisibility cloak still in his hands, then followed. Whether Lockhart's useless or not, he's going to the chamber. We should tell him what we know. Back in the common room, McGonagall had explained the situation, and the news spread like a chill. The Weasley boys went frantic when they learned it was Ginny. McGonagall comforted them briefly, then changed the fat lady's password and sent students to their dorms. Dylan made his slow way to the Gryffindor dormitory, jostled by students and watched with anxious faces. The Weasley twins forced their way through the crowd and flung themselves at him the moment he reached the portrait entrance. Dylan, is Ginny going to be all right? Can your divination tell us anything? Fred asked, eyes wide. Please, don't tell us bad news, George added, looking like he'd swallowed a hippogriff. Dylan's lips twitched. So, should I tell you the truth or lie so you feel better? Fred pushed past and followed Dylan into the dormitory anyway. Don't be funny. Tell us what you saw, Dylan. You can't keep secrets from us. George nodded vigorously. Yeah, come on. Dylan rolled his eyes. Don't worry. The professors are doing everything they can to rescue Ginny tonight. I don't think she's lost. That was all the twins needed. Their panic eased into a brittle relief. Hard to measure as true confidence, but it steadied them. Also, Dylan added, clapping one twin on the shoulder as they leaned against the bedposts. The professors are sending us home tomorrow. Look on the bright side. You'll miss exams. One twin groaned theatrically. I'd rather take the exams, he said, and even in the shadow of fear, a laugh slipped out. Chapter 154. Ha, Tom, what a lively body. I like you more than that ugly thing, Voldemort. Dylan shooed the Weasleys and the other students away and explained to Neville and his friends that he would be staying in his suitcase from now on. While Neville and Seamus wandered off to chat with classmates, Dylan's figure shimmered. Using Colball's Umber Shadow power, he melted into the darkness and merged with the shadows. Oh, Harry, is there anything else you want me to do? Myrtle floated in midair as Harry and his two companions entered the bathroom. Her cheeks were flushed. She was short, plump, and spotted with pimples. No, it's just that this professor and I have some things to do. Could you please go cry somewhere else? Myrtle sniffled. Of course. After Hermione's accident, Harry had already contacted Myrtle. He had suspected then that the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets might be in the sink of this bathroom, and now he confirmed his guess. Harry soon found a snake-shaped mark beneath one of the faucets and softly whispered the opening words in Parseltongue. With a grating, teeth-clenching sound, the floor split open, revealing a deep, dark passage. Damp, foul air rose from the opening, and the walls were slick with green moss. Hiss! This looks like the entrance to the hell Dylan mentioned, Ron gasped. Harry hesitated for a moment, looking down into the yawning, seemingly bottomless shaft. But he had already decided. I'm going down. He couldn't stall. Ginny's life might depend on how quickly he acted. Shouldn't we call Dylan first? Ron faltered. There's no time. Ginny could be suffering right now, Harry said. Ron hesitated, then nodded. All right, he hardly ever helps us with this sort of thing anyway. Lockhart eyed the pipe and gulped, trying on his practiced smile. Very well. I suppose you won't be needing me, so I'll just... You are the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Go on then, scout ahead, Harry said, pointing his wand at Lockhart. Lockhart looked offended, but before he could protest, Ron shoved him. I'm not scared yet. Where do you think you're running off to? Ron yelled. Ah! Lockhart plunged down the shaft with a shriek. It's filthy down here. I shouldn't be in a place like this. When they landed below in a heap of bleached bones, Ron complained. Ew, how much did that monster eat down here? This pipe goes much deeper than the underground classrooms, Harry observed. Lumos. Harry cast light from his wand. Let's go. Ginny must still be down here. They moved forward. The passage widened into a massive cavern. A pungent, foul stench filled the air. In the dim light, they could see a huge shed snakeskin ahead, slick and gleaming, a sickly green. My goodness, that skin must be at least 20 feet long, Ron whispered. It looks like a venomous snake. The basilisk is a venomous snake by nature, Harry said, frowning. Lockhart, lagging behind them, suddenly went rigid, his eyes rolling back. He collapsed to the floor with a theatrical groan. Ron moved closer, but Lockhart, with a practiced flip, snatched Ron's wand from his hand. Hey! Ron was startled. The adventure ends here, children. Lockhart cried, feigning faintness, while gripping Ron's wand and pointing it at them. I'll bring this skin back to Hogwarts and tell them I arrived too late to save the girl, and that you went mad at the sight of her bloody corpse. Now, goodbye to your memories. He lifted the wand and snapped. Obliviate! The spell backfired instantly. A flash of light erupted, and the blast threw Lockhart backward. At the same time, the cavern roof began shedding rocks and debris. Ron backed away from the falling stones, but the rout soon sealed the passage with rubble. Ron! Ron, are you all right? Harry called, peering through the gaps. I'm fine. It's just this idiot. He seems to have lost his memory, Ron said, dazed. He looked up, worried the whole tunnel might cave in. Wait here with Lockhart. I'll go on and find Ginny. If I stay here moving rocks, Ginny could be gone, Harry said. Go. I'll press on. All right? Ron tried to steady his voice. I'll move these stones, so you can come back through later. See you later, Harry said, and pushed on, stepping over the huge snakeskin. Ron watched him go, then bent down and tried to heave a rock clear. It was heavier than he'd guessed. Every inch of movement cost him effort and breath. As he strained, a vague shape flickered beside him, and a cool, questioning voice asked, Why aren't you using your wand? Where am I supposed to get a wand? Wait, Who are you? Ron began. Then the world flashed white. Obliviate, a soft voice echoed, and Ron's muscles unknotted. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. His eyes closed. He was unconscious. That was easier than expected, Dylan murmured, fingering the shadow ring on his hand with a faint smile. He looked at Lockhart, who had been knocked out earlier, and tapped his wand. Lockhart vanished in a bright flash. Dylan lifted the professor into his suitcase. He had prepared an identical suitcase in his dormitory, custom-made by his father, enchanted and secured so no one but Dylan could open it unless a professor intervened. After stowing Lockhart away, Dylan turned back to the pile of rocks blocking the corridor. Rather than laboriously move them like Ron, he dematerialized into shadow and slipped through the stones as if they weren't there. "The smell is atrocious," he said, wrinkling his nose. But it was nothing compared to the stench he'd encountered near the troll. This was simply the constant fermentation of rot in a closed, damp cave. It didn't need a protective bubble. He paused at the basilisk's shed skin. It was nearly as tall as his chest, torn and crushed in places, no doubt damaged when the beast shed and moved. Still, the Slavs were tough, able to deflect many spells, useful for armor or robes. Dylan gathered the pieces into his pouch. Basilisk skin might have magical properties. He planned to test them for new potions and experiments. He would have to find the living basilisk as well. If he could, it would be a remarkable specimen to study. Meanwhile, Harry pushed through a dim, columned chamber. Stone pillars carved with coiling serpents supported a ceiling that dissolved into shadow. Harry gripped his wand so tightly his knuckles ached. Adrenaline sharpened his senses. Ahead, a small figure lay on the floor, hair like fire. "Ginny," he cried, sprinting forward and dropping his wand. "Ginny, don't die!" He shook her shoulders. Her face was pale and bloodless. "Wake up! Wake up!" From the shadows beside a pillar, a tall, black-haired boy stepped out slowly. He watched Harry's panic with cold amusement. Before he could speak, a different voice drifted from the darkness. "Her face is so pale. She's so cute lying like that. But it's not good. She'll catch a cold." Tom Riddle startled. "Who are you?" he asked, tensing. Dylan emerged in a black robe, the garment making him blend with the gloom. He smiled faintly. "Don't be nervous. I won't hurt you." Riddle's eyelids twitched. His smile flickered with suspicion. "That is a perverted thing to say." Under his mask, Dylan's brows rose. "Oh, is it more perverted than you possessing a little girl and making her your puppet?" Riddle's expression froze. "How do you know that?" "Heh, I've always known," Dylan said. "Who are you?" Riddle demanded. "Time's short. Do as I say." Riddle's eyes flicked toward the wand Harry had dropped. "You still can't cast without a wand?" he sneered. Riddle edged toward Harry, but Dylan simply stood there, unconcerned. "You really had a pretty face when you were young," Dylan commented. "What?" Riddle said, stunned. He lunged toward Harry. "Harry Potter, come here." His voice became trapped. His body suddenly felt heavy and awkward. Dylan didn't shout back. "Don't shout. No one will come to save you, no matter how loudly you scream." Dylan studied Riddle with a calculating look. "Heh, when you grew into Lord Voldemort, you became so ugly I lost interest. But you, like this, still young, still vibrant, your memories and soul are valuable for my experiments." "I am Lord Voldemort," Riddle snapped, faltering. "I'm just a memory, and I'm only 16. "Of course I know," Dylan said, sneering. He raised his wand. "Imperio!" Riddle clutched his head in a sudden, sharp pain. Dylan's wand flashed, and then he dissipated like mist. The control spell that had seized Riddle dissolved with him. Riddle stumbled and collapsed to the floor. Harry blinked and finally saw him clearly. You're Tom?" he breathed. Riddle came back to himself slowly, confused and hollowed out by the unnamed compulsion. A strange impulse tugged at him. He reached for the diary in his hands. "Speak to me, Slytherin, the greatest of Hogwarts' 4 founders," he murmured. Deep within the chamber, the stones trembled. Slytherin's enormous stone face shifted, its mouth opening into a black cavity. Something slithered inside, making a wet, rustling sound. Harry backed away, then realized his wand lay nearby and reached for it. Riddle kicked it aside. "Don't waste your wand. Your spells won't threaten the basilisk." A long, flicking tongue sounded. A massive basilisk slid from the statue's mouth, scales dark and eyes narrowed into blood-red vertical slits. Harry's face drained of color. At that moment, a tall, black-robed figure, Dylan, who had been lurking, stepped into the pale light. The basilisk reared, sensing an uninvited presence. Dylan's lips curled with excitement at the sight of such a strong specimen, and he raised his wand. "Erebus Nexus," he intoned. Black, inky light erupted from his wand tip, and a crackling filled the air. Wisps of black mist crawled from under his feet and coalesced around him. Within the haze, many eyes, scarlet pupils without whites, blinked into being and began to orbit him, spinning slowly as if taken from another world. The basilisk, unable to sense any familiar master, felt threatened and growled. When those eerie red eyes swarmed the chamber, the serpent's proud head jerked back. It tried to stare down Riddle, but the floating, bloody eyes unnerved it, and its limited reptile mind broke under the pressure. Instead of attacking, the basilisk recoiled, rubbing its scales in uneasy agitation and cowering behind Riddle. Its former menace dissolved into frantic writhing. Harry shut his eyes and staggered backward as if needles prickled his brain. The sight of those eyes hammered into his skull like 1,000 pins. Dylan stood amid the black mist, more uncanny and terrifying than ever. Then a deep, resonant voice echoed through the chamber. "Tom, embrace me, Karthus. You will be my finest experimental subject, along with this basilisk." Avada Kedavra! Dylan's wand flashed a blinding white light. The unforgivable curse struck Riddle. Riddle's own black aura was shattered. The curse didn't kill the memory, but it dispersed its darkness. Ginny, lying unconscious, slowly began to brighten. Color returned to her cheeks, her frown loosened, and breath came back to her lungs. The diary and Riddle's presence dissolved from the chamber. As Dylan tapped his wand, they vanished. He stepped toward the basilisk. The huge beast trembled and tried to pull away, tightly shutting its eyes to avoid looking at him. Dylan set his wand tip over the creature's head and murmured, "Reducio." Under the charm, the massive basilisk shrank. The once terrifying monster dwindled into a small snake hardly longer than Dylan's palm. He wrapped the little black serpent around his wrist like an accessory, then turned and looked toward Harry. Harry stood with his eyes screwed shut, body still shaking from what he had seen. Dylan's smile was small and unrateable. With a flicker, he vanished from the chamber. For a long, suspended moment, everything was eerily quiet. Harry dared not breathe more than a whisper, every second an eternity. He forced himself not to summon that vision again, the pale face, the red eyes. At last, a soft groan from Ginny broke the silence. "Ginny!" Harry cried, stumbling to her side. She moaned and blinked as motion returned to her. He waited anxiously, then opened his eyes. The chamber was empty. The mist was gone. The giant snake, Tom Riddle, and that mysterious black-robed man had all vanished as if they had never been there. Dim light spilled across the stone floor. Harry stood dazed. A bright form flashed overhead, a phoenix, gold and radiant, swooping across the chamber with something in its talons. It was carrying a tattered hat, the sorting hat. The phoenix landed in the center of the chamber, let out a clear cry, and then flew straight at Harry, dropping the hat into his hands. Fawkes circled slowly, letting out a few contented chirps as if checking on them. "Oh, a surprised little boy and a confused little girl. You look like you've eaten undercooked belladonna," the sorting hat muttered as Harry held it. It wriggled and complained, irritated at being tugged about so roughly. "Put me down quickly. It's uncomfortable being held like that. Dumbledore should trim your talons." The hat grumbled half to itself. Fawkes fluffed its feathers and settled beside them. Harry, still trembling, clutched Ginny as she stirred. The hat wiggled in his arms, and then, with a satisfied little bounce, released something inside itself, something heavy and metallic glinting with a blade's edge. The sword of Gryffindor tumbled into Harry's hands, having been carried protected inside the sorting hat. The hat fidgeted. "I'm not a scabbard. I'm a hat. I don't enjoy being stuck on a sword. But there, Dumbledore said for me to give it to you. There. Don't look at me like that." Harry stared at the sword, then at Ginny, and the relief that flooded him was almost unbearable. The chamber was quiet again, and though the memory of those red eyes lingered, for now Ginny was alive, and that was all that mattered. Chapter 155, Meet Vera Again? "Basilisk, this is a monster!" Dylan slipped back to the dormitory in the shadows, keeping quiet. The rest of the business no longer needed his attention. He only had to let Karthus step forward and deal with things in front of Harry. Harry would tell Dumbledore the rest. Dylan needed to get back to his research. When he reached the dormitory, no one else was inside. Neville and Seamus's trunks lay on their beds, half-packed and messy. The Weasley twins had probably dragged them out while packing. Dylan moved to swap out the trunk beside his bed for the real Pet Dimension suitcase, but the door was suddenly shoved open with a bang. The noise made Dylan jump. For a heartbeat, he feared the worst. Had someone discovered that he'd taken the basilisk and the Horcruxes? That couldn't be. He'd just returned, hadn't even seen Fawkes, and Dumbledore couldn't possibly know. Nobody should have known. Could Harry, like Sun Wukong, have blazing golden eyes? Had Lily's protection done something that far-reaching? 2 Aurors pushed into the room as if they owned it. "You there, what are you doing? Trying to hide dark arts items?" one barked. "We told everyone to gather outside. Why are you still here? Name?" Both men were aggressive. Tall, shadowed in the dim light, the Auror in front had cold eyes like frost. The other narrowed his eyes and advanced. Dylan realized they were ministry men. He'd thought they'd come to arrest him. Instead, they were searching rooms. He bit back a scoff. Some ministry fool had come to root around, probably at Lucius Malfoy's prompting. Malfoy and his connections would do anything to stir trouble, but that wouldn't bring Dumbledore down. Whether it was Slytherin's heir or the possibility of Voldemort's resurrection, those things were Dylan's to control. He wasn't about to hand Tom over. Not until he'd finished studying Horcruxes. "Hawkwood, sir," Dylan said, keeping his voice steady. "I was just reading from my trunk. I didn't know what was going on." The 2 Aurors exchanged a glance, then looked to the trunk at Dylan's feet. "Open it. We suspect dark arts items inside." Dylan frowned. He wasn't worried about them inspecting the fake trunk. He'd had an undetectable extension charm put on it when it was custom made. The internal space wasn't huge, but big enough for a person to sit in or brew potions. Still, why submit? And even if he complied, would they make things difficult? He already had a good idea who'd sent them. Maybe Malfoy was taking the chance to get back at him for the bookstore incident. That man and his son deserved scolding. Dylan made a mental note to teach them cruelty when next they met. "Do you have a search warrant from the ministry?" Dylan asked, masking impatience with the curiosity of a student. The Aurors bristled. "What nonsense. Open your trunk now, or we'll act." The taller Auror's face looked oddly familiar to Dylan. This might be the man who'd been controlled with Imperio in Nocturne Alley. Dylan's eyes cooled. The Auror met his gaze and flinched. The young wizard's expression held a helplessness that made the man uneasy. "All right," Dylan said calmly, "if you insist." The tall Auror paused, unsettled by Dylan's tone, but the bearded one snapped. "We have a warrant. Open it." Dylan almost felt like disintegrating them both with a killing curse and using their corpses to harvest obsidian flowers, but he kept his face composed. Just as he reached for the latch, a new voice came from the doorway. "Why all the commotion?" A young woman had entered. She was slim and lithe in a black uniform, long brown hair in a ponytail. Dylan and the woman stared and then both froze. "Sister Vera," he said. "Dylan, you're here." Vera's face was cool, but a smile tugged at her lips. "I was just reading in my trunk," Dylan said. "I haven't the slightest idea what's going on." Vera nodded, and with a single gesture of a pale, graceful hand, she dismissed the 2 Aurors. "Get out. You don't need to search here." The Aurors froze. They hadn't expected the leader of their search team to recognize this young wizard. The tall one opened his mouth, then shut it when he saw Vera's impassive face. He stowed the sneakoscope he'd been fiddling with and strode for the door. Vera might be 6 or 7 years younger than many of them, but her ruthlessness was notorious in the ministry. Never underestimate her. Her freezing charm skill was exceptional. Offensive, defensive, disarming, trapping. Anyone who tried to use seniority to intimidate her found themselves frozen, and she'd become a rising star among the Aurors in just 2 years. People spoke, too, of promotions and of her connections. She was from the Fukasco family, no longer one of the wizarding world's top houses, perhaps, but still not someone to trifle with. No one wanted to be the one to make her angry and risk a parent from Diagon Alley storming in. After the 2 Aurors left, Vera walked over to Dylan. "Professor Flitwick told me you helped Professor Snape brew a mandrake restorative draught?" Dylan gave a small, embarrassed smile. All thanks to Professor Snape's teaching. I couldn't have done it alone. Vera's mouth curved. I heard you use that potion to help someone who was first attacked. Dylan blinked. Professor Snape taught the formula. I brew a lot of potions and happened to have 2 bottles ready. Vera's expression turned serious. The pair that were taken earlier, someone mentioned you when we were told to search. Dylan gestured toward her. What exactly are you doing here, Vera? We're searching for dark arts items, she said. Her tone hardened slightly. Someone reported a murder planned at Hogwarts, so the ministry sent us. Dylan raised an eyebrow. A murder? That must have stirred public opinion. Vera looked surprised. You figured that out? Just logical deduction, he said. She didn't deny it. I don't know who said there'd be a murder, but the press coverage has put the ministry under pressure. With Dumbledore temporarily removed, they worry administrative chaos could follow. They sent us to secure the school, find any dark arts artifacts, and track down the mastermind behind the Chamber of Secrets. So you suspect someone's hiding dark arts in the school? Dylan nodded. That would explain today. Vera sighed. We don't have a clear lead, but one student was abducted. A murder could still happen. We're trying to find the chamber's entrance and the girl before she's harmed. Dylan's face tightened. Everything that's happened lately is awful. Vera scanned the room and, finding nothing incriminating, turned back to him. You don't have dark arts items here. Go down to the common room and gather with the others. We'll finish searching soon. Her voice toward Dylan was softer than the brusque orders she'd given the Aurors. He nodded and didn't protest. Dylan had the basilisk secured and suppressed with several dark spells in the pet dimension suitcase. Norberta was keeping watch, and the basilisk couldn't cause trouble. He followed Vera down to the Gryffindor common room, which was packed. Nearly every Gryffindor student was gathered there. Vera's presence drew attention immediately. Percy, who seemed to know her, came over and stood beside Dylan. Before anyone could say much, the common room doors burst open. Miss Vera, new report from the professors. The monster from the Chamber of Secrets has been taken by Carthus. Vera went pale. Carthus? Here at Hogwarts? The Auror who delivered the message was winded, bewildered. I don't know how. Everyone, pack up. Come with me to the staff room, Vera ordered. The Aurors who'd been searching the dormitories retreated. Close the doors. Stay put. Don't run about. She looked down at Dylan. Go back and keep reading. You're a diligent student. Study hard. She patted his shoulder and with 4 Aurors left the common room. A ripple of fear and disbelief ran through the gathered students. Carthus? My uncle at the ministry says he's a vicious dark wizard. He's killed many people. He calls himself the Fool and wants to send people to the afterlife. I heard he's been in Nocturne Alley. He uses unforgivable curses, cruelly, takes money too. Is that the Carthus? Who is he? The chatter snowballed. Stories of Carthus's cruelty and reputation spread among the Gryffindors. Dylan, listening, couldn't help but twitch an eye. So that's how the rumor went now. He'd stolen money, he'd used grandiose rhetoric. That had all been part of his act, his great cause. And if taking people to prison was enlightenment, then so be it. My father told me not to go out much during the holidays. It's not safe, one student fretted. Same. I'm glad I stayed at school at Easter, another said. They said a group of Aurors went after him and got beaten up, someone added. He's so dangerous, some think he's a new Dark Lord. I saw people chanting his name like cultists in an alley, scared me to death. Dylan listened, raising a brow. Had Carthus's name really burned that far and fast? Strange, he thought. No new notable feats had been added to his record. Neville, are you okay? We heard shouting from the dorms, someone asked. Neville, Seamus, Dean, and the Weasley twins squeezed into the room. The twins grinned at Dylan. Did you teach those Aurors a lesson? No, Dylan said, shaking his head. He asked Percy, You know Vera? A model Auror in training, reserved, a bit cold, Percy said. How do you know her? We met over ice cream, Dylan said, smiling. Why were they searching the dormitories? Are other houses being searched too? Neville looked sheepish. Yes, Seamus and I were packing when an Auror burst in and gathered us. He said someone suspected dark arts items. Dean scoffed. In Gryffindor? Impossible. No one here would turn to dark arts unless they were a fool. Dylan covered the comment with a light cough. Since they left, we should pack up. We don't know what's happening, but it's safer to be ready to go home. Neville agreed. And if Carthus really took the chamber's monster, the school could be more dangerous. Let's pack and leave tomorrow. Not many students actually returned to their rooms, but Dylan did. He'd told Neville and Seamus to tidy their beds and stalled while they worked. Dean and the Weasleys had left under Percy's orders. Back in the dormitory, Dylan pretended to take out a trunk, placed it on his bed, and quietly stowed the fake trunk away. He pulled out the pet dimension carry-on and opened its lid, climbing inside. Inside, the basilisk made a string of plaintive, almost bovine noises, odd little moos as it stirred. The basilisk's great head shifted, its eyelids struggled to open. A small black ball of yarn leapt about on its face, bouncing from left to right, then landing on its head and batting at an eye. The poke made it cry out and snap its eyelids shut again. How could such a tiny black ball of yarn be so persistent? The creature's soul was still restrained by the dark spells Dylan had used, rendering it unable to resist or move properly. It was furious, but helpless. "Coal ball," Dylan murmured. The little ball stopped and stepped lightly onto the basilisk's head, then turned toward him. Norberta moved closer, too. Norberta was not afraid. Her innate magic resistance let her evade the basilisk's petrifying gaze long enough to put herself between them. Dylan stroked Norberta and approached the basilisk. Once bound by magic and nearly immobile, the snake was now trembling with panic. Its vertical pupils were frantic. When Dylan's chin came into its field of vision, it averted its eyes and pressed itself to the floor like it wanted to burrow into the earth. A low, fearful hiss came from the basilisk. It looked less like a terrifying magical predator and more like an abused, frightened animal. "You shed that shrinking spell too fast," Dylan said, amused. "Your magic resistance is high." The basilisk trembled. This human, unlike the masked black-robed wizard who had abused it, radiated the same kind of evil power as the spells that had bound its soul. It was certain this was the same vicious being, only more terrifying. Dylan studied the creature. 10 to 12 meters, he estimated. He corrected himself aloud. 11 meters. You could probably have grown longer. He let out a quiet sound in his throat, suppressing the urge to breathe flame, then moved in closer and opened his jaw. The basilisk's eyes widened. It whined but did not resist. It had been conditioned to obey, to swallow whatever instructions it had been given. Now, the roles were reversed. The human who could become a monster was the monster the basilisk feared. Dylan transformed. Animagus. A bright light wrapped him. His form curved and shifted, bones creaked and reformed. In seconds, where Dylan had stood, a Norwegian ridgeback dragon folded its wings. Larger than Norberta, loomed. The basilisk shuddered in terror. One moment the thing had been a human, the next a monster covered in eyes, and now a dragon. Dylan spread his wings and lifted. He had practiced flying in dragon form long enough to be proficient. He hovered above the basilisk, one claw pressed to its head. The snake writhed and gave sharp, conflicted hisses, equal parts threat and plea, but could not break free. "Don't move," Dylan ordered, and dragged a claw across the basilisk's forehead. It flinched, then went limp as he used his wings and claws to straighten its coiling body. He inspected it rapidly, like a scientist noting vital statistics. Approximately 11 meters. That's enough to produce a very large obsidian flower. He leaned in and forced the basilisk's mouth open. The creature's teeth were rimed with muck and small bones. "You mostly eat small rodents in the sewers, do you?" Dylan muttered. He methodically examined, measured, and cataloged everything the way he always did in his experiments. When the basilisk lay entirely limp, unresponsive, Dylan shifted back into human form. He had Norberta pry the mouth wider while he raised his wand. Aguamenti! A cold, powerful stream of water blasted into the basilisk's mouth, cleansing years of grime and mucus from between its fangs and flushing out little bones lodged there. The water sparkled as it rinsed, washing away the worst of the accumulation. Next, Chapter 156, Super Trait, Eye of the Serpentine End. Compared with real dragons, this basilisk looks more like one in my mind, though in its present state, it could at best be called a flood dragon. Dylan studied the basilisk from every angle. Finally, he let it go. But a basilisk like this doesn't breed naturally. It's a monster hatched from a cock's egg by a toad, conjured by some dark wizard's foul magics. He stood, placing the scales he had plucked, the ground horn powder, and some of the teeth he'd shaved off into small vials. He walked slowly toward the small lab bench in the little room he used for experiments. The thought that one day he might be able to research a true dragon from this creature made him quietly excited. Whether by technology or magic, daring to imagine is the blade that cuts through reality's fog. First, you sketch the plan in your mind, then you find a path to reach it. If he could travel here from his own world, what else was absolutely impossible? As Dylan left, the basilisk's massive body collapsed on the floor like a broken rope, its huge head hanging limply. The fierce light in its eyes was gone. Even its usually rigid scales sagged, clinging weakly to its flanks. Many patches of scale were scraped off by magic, revealing one bruised, bloodied wound after another. Though no fresh blood seeped, everything had been collected long ago. Red stains rimmed its mouth, and some of its teeth had been forcefully broken off, leaving uneven stubs. The gums around the broken teeth were swollen and inflamed. Every breath tore at them and made the creature tremble. Its pupils were pinpoints the size of soybeans, and its gaze tracked Dylan with a mixture of fear and numbness. Coalball scurried after him. Norberta looked at the sorry sight of the great snake and remembered with a curl of distaste how her own master had once plucked her scales and drained her blood. He really was gentle compared to that. Norberta drew back her neck, a flicker of pity crossing her reptilian face. Still, whatever her master wanted to do, she would support him. Whoever had done this to a ferocious snake like that must have provoked him badly, so this smelly serpent deserved it. Her simple brain sorted the facts quickly, and she lifted her head to follow Dylan. In just over a year, she'd grown considerably. The little house where Dylan conducted experiments couldn't really contain her, but she'd learned to be content to patrol the outside, proud and watchful, like a guard protecting her master from disturbance. Dylan laid the basilisk materials on the table and wasn't in a hurry to begin experiments. Instead, he glanced at his system panel. The achievements icon flashed rhythmically. Let's claim these achievement rewards first. He clicked. Dylan skimmed the list of completed achievements. Achievement I, Lord Voldemort. Description: Lord Voldemort will henceforth serve you in housekeeping and cleaning. Completion requirement: possess Lord Voldemort. Note: how is possessing part of his soul not counted as possessing him? Reward: max level random dark arts +1. Achievement: terrifying the good student. You, evil one, as a schoolmate nearly scared a good student to death. Terrible. Completion requirement: make Tom Riddle feel genuine horror. Reward: mental control magic resistance +10. Achievement: Riddle Breakdown Observer. Description: what better establishes you as the new Dark Lord than watching the old one collapse at your feet? Witness the former Dark Lord's spectacular breakdown. Vague perception of others' strong, negative emotions. Achievement: interdimensional human trafficker. Description: you actually trafficked people in front of the Savior and snakes. Completion requirement: kidnap a hostage with Harry as a witness. Reward: Dark Lord Aura +10. Achievement: Serpent's Eye Horror. You have won the fear of the King of Snakes. All serpents will fear you. Make the basilisk regard you as a great ominous being. Reward: Eye of the Serpentine End. Dylan raised an eyebrow. The most useful rewards were clearly the max-level dark arts and the Eye of the Serpentine End. He chose to claim the max-level dark arts first. Closing his eyes, he felt the void open and a single dark star flare above his head. With his thought, the star crashed down. Swish! Magic flared around him. He raised his wand and whispered an incantation. A ball of eerie green light exploded before him, and from it, a giant serpent slowly uncoiled. Its scales shone coldly, its rough skin bristled with menace, and its size matched the basilisk's. Its triangular head sat high, vertical pupils burning with predatory ferocity. Its flicking tongue carried a putrid stench. Congratulations! You have mastered the max-level spell, Serpensordia, Summon Serpent. Dylan blinked. A summoning spell of a dark serpent. Not the puny one Malfoy had called at the dueling club, but this, a true dark serpent, huge and fearsome. He smiled in satisfaction. A casual use had already shown how different a max-level spell felt. He thought about the basilisk still in his suitcase space. The ministry forbade creation of basilisks, too evil and dangerous, so it would have to remain hidden as research material. If it were obedient, he might let it replace Norberta or Coalball as a guardian in the suitcase, rather than keeping it paralyzed under constant spells. Long inactivity would make it sluggish, and the materials it yielded would degrade. That was unacceptable. Dylan hadn't gained another pet contract from the achievement, and using Imperio on the basilisk was impractical. Its magic resistances and the drain on his power would be crippling. Even if he chained it with soul spells, he couldn't live in the suitcase forever. The risk of it growing cunning and destroying his carefully built space loomed. If he couldn't control the basilisk directly, he could control Tom. Tom was a remnant soul shard and weak, easy prey for Imperio. Let Tom control the basilisk, problem solved. Dylan turned his attention to the other reward. Trait, Eye of the Serpentine End. Ability 1, Serpent's Demise Effect. Open the Eye of the Serpentine End, and all snakes within a 44-meter radius around you will be forced into rigid paralysis. Non-snake enemies who meet your gaze will be dragged into a dream illusion, suffering an overwhelming, endless fear of a snake apocalypse. Ability 2, Serpent's Curse Effect. You gain Parseltongue. Every Parseltongue sentence you speak can be magically transcribed into a chapter of the worm apocalypse. Sacrificing this book causes psychic contamination in others. Ability 3, Fear Backlash Effect. Snakes intimidated and killed by you project their final tragic death scenes into your dreams. The more there are, the stronger your serpent's demise becomes. Dylan raised an eyebrow. The trait gave 3 abilities, each formidable. The first was a domain-like effect. Within 44 meters, snakes would instantly stiffen, basilisk included. If he could integrate that into an object, he could have Coalball, or the object itself, control the basilisk's movement. The gaze effect could also drag non-snakes into terrifying dreams. Strong-willed foes might break free, but catching someone unprepared would give Dylan a chance to strike. Ability 2 granted Parseltongue outright. He wouldn't need Harry's soul or to refine Riddle's remnant. As Dylan adjusted to the power, an eerie black mist rose from his palm and a thick tome appeared, bound in rough, blood-dark leather with metal bindings like twisted fangs. The cover bore huge characters. Worm Apocalypse. Just looking at it is mentally corrosive, Dylan murmured. He opened the book. The yellowed, coarse pages bore runes that writhed like worms. Dylan felt they related to Parseltongue, and with a cautious breath, he spoke the first paragraph in the tongue only serpents understood. A long, winding hiss uncoiled into the air. Threads of magic flowed from his fingertips into the pages, recording the curse in a ribbon of blood-red light. The runes trembled and seemed to come alive, slimy, writhing, filling him with that nauseating sensation as if countless cold worms crawled inside his guts. As owner of the text, he felt only a breeze, but the book's aura was unmistakable. Mental contamination, he said, frowning. He looked at Coalball. The little umber shadow stared at the book, bared its teeth, and backed away toward the door. If it's indiscriminate psychic contamination, that's going to be troublesome. Might have to hand this to Karthus. Dylan imagined a black-robed figure holding a scepter in one hand, summoning mountains of corpses and seas of blood while unleashing endless nightmares with Serpent's Demise, and the Apocalypse book in the other, spreading psychic rot. He could rain down unforgivable curses without a wand and pile killing domains on top of each other. He laughed hollowly. I don't remember wanting to be this kind of person, he said. But if it takes me further, it's acceptable. He hadn't actually killed anyone yet. His experiments were radical, but he still told himself he was a good student, far better than Tom. Dylan studied the third ability, Fear Backlash. It wasn't as flashy, but it amplified the first ability. The depth of the nightmares he could impose depended on how many snakes he'd killed and how tragic their deaths were. The more harrowing, the deeper the fear he'd force on others. He let out a small sigh. Around him, roaches and spiders froze rigid under the trait's aura. At least it's not something ridiculous like underworld beetle pressure, he muttered, amused at the thought. Satisfied, he closed the system panel. He turned to Coalball. Go play with Beta. Don't let other creatures bother the lab. If they fight in the forest, collect the blood, fur, teeth, and bones and bring them back. Coalball blinked and gave a small nod. Moo. Although Coldball's speech wasn't literally Parseltongue, he was an umber shadow, a rare magical creature. He was Dylan's pet and understood intent. Before Dylan had completed his animagus form, he'd communicated with Beta in other ways. Now, having become a Norwegian Ridgeback himself, conversation with Norberta came more naturally. After Coldball left, Dylan began preserving the basilisk materials properly. Magical ingredients degrade with time and improper storage. If the enchantments faded, the items would become useless. When the materials were sorted, he didn't rush into experiments. He had abducted Tom and a Horcrux and the basilisk. The timeline here diverged from the original story, and he had no way to predict what would happen next. He might read, he might sleep, and wait to see what came tomorrow. Before leaving the suitcase space, he took out a notebook, wrapped in a wizard's robe. He'd applied several concealment effects to it: sight obscuring, sensory shielding, sound damping. He wasn't sure whether little Tom could transmit information to other remnants of Voldemort by some method, so even without using Imperio, he preferred caution. He didn't want old Voldemort to learn his identity before Deng and the professors did. "I'll just hide this in the corner for now. Only I come to this laboratory." Dylan placed Tom's diary on a shelf in the corner. In the lab, he planned to wear a black robe that hid his face so that if anything leaked, his true appearance wouldn't be recognized. Prudence, small and necessary. He smiled to himself. Then suddenly, he thought, "Wait, what am I talking about?" Chapter 157. Old Dumbledore is looking for you. Characteristics. Do you understand what you're reading? I slept in the dormitory all night. Harry and Ron still hadn't returned, and the next morning brought more of the same. Then the heads announced something that stopped everyone in their tracks. The students who had planned to take the Hogwarts Express home were told their trip was canceled. Exams, they said. They would have to stay at Hogwarts. The Gryffindors and the rest of the school were left confused and a little hopeful. Could it mean the Chamber of Secrets crisis was over? The latest rumor came quickly. Ginny had been saved, rescued by her savior, Harry. After breakfast, I went back to the dormitory and waited. Nothing new happened, and I couldn't help a small exhale of relief. Professors and Dumbledore seemed to be focused entirely on Karthus now. I should be doing things as Karthus, actually. The theft, I told myself, but to avoid trouble, I'll let it go for now. I also had a secret itch to study a cloning spell. If I could make a perfect clone, one with my abilities to do my dirty work, life would be a lot easier. And why hadn't I gotten the achievement for 1 chi transforms into 3 purities? I pouted at the thought. I was about to duck into the small pocket of space in my trunk to do some reading when a clear, melodious cry cut through the quiet outside the window. Everyone else had gone out. I was the only one left in the room. I looked up and saw a flash, a ball of flame almost too quick to make out. Before I fully registered it, a phoenix was standing on my bed. My eyelids twitched. "You haven't washed your feet." Fawkes lifted a foot as if to hop down. I reached out and held it down. "Forget it. You're already standing there. Even if you get down, my bed's still dirty." The phoenix cocked its head, withdrew its toes from the sheet, then realized they'd creased the bedding and smoothed them with a flap of wing. It was a little flustered. "Chirp," it sang. As a phoenix, it couldn't speak words, but its cries conveyed meaning. I could read the emotion. It wanted me to come. I pulled my hand back and accidentally plucked a feather. "Chirp," it cried, sharply, pained. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. You won't be angry, will you?" I said, smoothing the feather back into my palm. It went right into my hand and vanished. I looked at Fawkes with an apologetic expression and reached back, but the bird flapped up and hopped onto Harry's bed instead, peering at me. "Headmaster Dumbledore wants me to come?" I asked. Fawkes nodded, earnest and emphatic. My heart skipped a beat, but my face stayed calm. "Why does the headmaster want me? I heard the Chamber of Secrets thing was resolved. Does Dumbledore still think I fixed it?" Fawkes cocked his head again, giving me a look that said pretty plainly, "Do I look like I can tell you that?" I laughed. "Fine. Since Dumbledore sent you, I'll go." I was up late reading anyway and planned to catch up on sleep afterward. I had nothing to pack. I grabbed my flying broom, leaning against the wall, and stepped onto it. Whoosh! I flew out the window, Fawkes close at my side. We rose a floor, the wind whipping past our ears. and soon we reached the headmaster's tower. Rather than climb the passworded staircase, I flew to the window and knocked. After a moment, a familiar figure appeared behind the glass. Silver hair, a flowing beard, half-moon spectacles on a kindly nose. Dumbledore opened the window, a trace of surprise in his eyes, the corners of his mouth lifting in amusement. "Your entrance is unique," he teased. Over the time we'd known each other, I had worried Dumbledore was the sort of old fox who would sniff out any secret. But he still didn't seem to know mine. If he'd discovered anything, he wouldn't have sent Fawkes to fetch me so gently. I grinned and shot back. "Wasn't it you who sent Fawkes?" Dumbledore laughed softly. "Indeed. Come in, my boy." I flew into the office and landed, setting the broom upright. Inside, Dumbledore wasn't alone. Harry was there, and to my surprise, so was Vera, an Auror. I nodded a greeting at her. The mood in the office was relaxed, not grave. That was promising. Dumbledore smiled at us all. "Nothing urgent. I just have a few questions." "Go ahead," I said. Dumbledore turned to Vera and Harry. "This is an Auror sent from the Ministry." "I know," I said. "Do you two know each other?" he asked. Vera answered easily, smirking. "A cute little brother who often comes by my family's ice cream shop for a treat." Dumbledore's expression shifted into relief. "Ah, Fortescue runs the shop alone. Without a few regular kids, he'd struggle to keep it going." I clicked my tongue inside my cheek. Leave it to Dumbledore to make a double joke. Vera snorted, but didn't deny it. The fact she could mention her family's business at all said something. The relationship between her and her father must have thawed a bit since last Christmas. Not bad. "Sister Vera, I'm not a child anymore," I protested. She gave me a cool look, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Only children make a habit of entering through windows." "Don't say that," I said. "Last time Voldemort fled, he went out a window." Vera startled. Dumbledore added, "Voldemort was attached to Quirrell then. Dylan was there too." Vera blinked at me. "You? How did you get involved with Quirrell?" "I was nearby," I said. "The professor and others have probably told the Ministry. I was just passing by." I asked, curious, "How is Quirrell now? Did you get anything useful from him?" Dumbledore's smile stayed, but his voice turned quieter. "Not really. We sent him to the Ministry. I don't know the details after that." Vera cut in, taking the thread. "Quirrell died last year. I had just joined the Ministry and was handed that mess. I even handled his body." I kept my face calm, but let out a well-timed surprise. "Dead? How?" "I thought Voldemort, when he left Quirrell, didn't hurt him physically." Dumbledore stood behind me and looked at me for a moment, reading me. Then he said, "You who spend so much time in the restricted section, you're aware that when two souls are entangled in one body, the departing soul can drain the host's vitality and shatter their spirit. You know I go to the restricted section?" I asked, scratching my head sheepishly. "I haven't told the other professors. I read about soul entanglement in general knowledge," I added. "Even if the host's vitality is badly depleted and their soul fractured, that usually isn't enough to kill them outright." Dumbledore studied me a beat, then chuckled. "You've done your homework." "Yes," I said. "Ordinary possession aside, the loss of one soul normally wouldn't be fatal, but you know it was Voldemort." "He took most of Quirrell's life to make his escape," Dumbledore said softly. "I couldn't save him." Vera's brow tightened. "It wasn't your fault. Quirrell fell to temptation. Even when he was dead, he radiated a vile, corrupting aura. Handling him was disgusting." I looked to Vera. "Why did the Ministry have a newly sworn Auror handle something like that?" She paused, then shrugged. "Maybe they wanted to test me. Still, I gained favor after the incident, and now I captain an Auror team." Harry had been standing there, listening to the three of us trade stories. He looked a little lost. He watched me, thinking I was some bookish loner, more than Hermione, he had assumed. But now he saw I had been everywhere. The Chamber of Secrets with Ministry people, an ice cream parlor in Diagon Alley, friends with Aurors. It must have looked very strange to him. What had I been doing while they were hunting in air? The answer was studying, and more than that. "Dylan," Dumbledore said, turning to me, "the main reason I called you here is to confirm something. Have you read anything about Horcruxes in the restricted section?" I raised an eyebrow. "Horcruxes? That's a subject I've wanted to understand. I've run into the term in various books, but I haven't found a clear explanation." Dumbledore looked straight at me. I met his gaze without flinching. By now, I had almost mastered occlumency. I kept my mind clear and controlled. In fact, I had a particular trait that helped. When I practiced occlumency, it automatically analyzed the logic and structure of any invading magic. The characteristic scrambled any spell trying to penetrate my thoughts, confounding it by reassembling my hidden information into a maze. In short, even if my occlumency wasn't perfect, Dumbledore wouldn't be able to read anything unless he caught me directly. That thought kept me steady while Dumbledore's eyes searched mine. Chapter 158. Lucius, did you call me here to insult me? You know Lockhart is missing? Dumbledore's eyes fell on Dylan. Missing? In what sense? Dylan asked. Ron was ambushed, and later I saw a black-robed man calling himself Karthus. He barely moved. He just stood there, but he made the basilisk tremble, Harry explained for Dylan. And most importantly, that man actually used an unforgivable curse on Tom's diary. That kind of power is terrifying, evil in a way Tom's dark aura never was. But oddly, Harry added, the spell light was white, almost holy-looking, and yet utterly malevolent. Dumbledore opened his mouth to respond, then chuckled and nodded. I didn't know what happened last night. Vera sent me a message this morning asking me to return to Hogwarts. Only then did I learn of these events. Karthus? Dylan sounded surprised. How could he have been at Hogwarts? Dylan, you know Karthus? Harry was stunned. Dylan seemed to know everything. Dylan shrugged. I saw a wanted poster Vera was putting up at Uncle Fukasco's drink shop and happened to see his face. He looked up at Vera. She nodded. A few strands of chestnut hair caught the light, but she couldn't hide the cold in her eyes. Oh, Harry blinked. Do you know anything more about him? Dumbledore asked. Dylan shook his head. I only heard Vera say he's very dangerous. If you meet him, you'd best run. Vera curled her lip. Maybe you can't run from him at all, but running is still the right idea. Dumbledore frowned. I'm very surprised he would come to the school. Perhaps Mr. Malfoy was right. The academy should raise its protection level. Otherwise, many students will face evils they shouldn't have to. He paused and looked up. We were talking about Lockhart. What happened to him? Let Harry tell it, Dumbledore said. I called you here also to hear Harry's account. He and Mr. Weasley are too impetuous. They need a steadier young wizard like you to keep them in check. Harry's face flushed. It's nothing, really. Ron and I overheard the professors talking, and to save Ginny, we went to Lockhart for help. I didn't expect him to be like the rumors, Harry continued. He used memory charms on people. He's a fraud. That's shocking, Dylan said calmly. I didn't expect it either. Harry wrinkled his nose. Later, he grabbed Ron's wand and tried to attack me, but his spell backfired because Ron's wand was broken. Dylan nodded. Then the passage was blocked by stones, so I went to find Ginny and left Ron to move them. But then Karthus appeared and took Tom and the basilisk away. When I returned, Ron was unconscious. Harry looked troubled. After I got him and Ginny to the hospital wing, I told the professors. As for Lockhart, Ron doesn't know where he went. Maybe he knew he was a fraud and ran off, Dylan said. That's it. Harry suddenly brightened. When Ron and I went to his office to find him, he was just about to run away. By the way, Dylan asked, why did you go to Lockhart for help instead of Professor McGonagall or the others? If the professors had gone, the basilisk wouldn't have caused so much trouble, right? Harry blinked. I don't know. At the time, I just felt we should go to Lockhart, and Professor McGonagall told us to let him go to the Chamber of Secrets first. Dylan pressed his lips together. Since you overheard the staff, you and Ron must have heard what we said afterwards. The reason the professors said that was to get Lockhart out of the way, wasn't it? Harry's embarrassment deepened. It was urgent. I didn't think that far. Dylan clicked his tongue. Vera took up the conversation. Judging by what happened, Karthus doesn't seem to be allied with Lord Voldemort. I suspect he wants to become the new Dark Lord himself. Dumbledore arched an eyebrow. Oh, why do you say that? Vera's expression was grave. The Ministry has received more reports recently. At first it was subtle, but now many wizards seem to support Karthus. He calls himself Fool and want him to replace Voldemort. Dylan turned to her. Vera, were the people you arrested last time released? Vera nodded. Most of them. They were under Karthus's Imperius at the time. I still don't know how he controlled so many people at once. She sighed. Except for a few who truly wanted to follow Karthus and would cause destruction if freed, we could continue to detain them. But I can't keep the others in ministry cells indefinitely. That would be illegal. You've done well, Dylan said with concern. It's my job, Vera replied, but shook her head. I searched the Chamber of Secrets last night and confirmed there was no more immediate danger. This morning I informed the ministry, and Dumbledore's transfer order was already being processed, so I asked him to come back as soon as possible, she added. Dylan found himself surprised. Vera's influence was substantial. She'd managed to circumvent the usual procedures to call Dumbledore back. He briefly wondered if saving Cedric and contacting his father were still necessary. Vera seemed poised to rise through the ministry, and with her connections, maybe those steps were redundant. Dumbledore smiled. Thanks to you, I won't be left basking in the sun outside any longer. He studied Dylan for a moment. Dylan betrayed no sign of deception, and the headmaster gave up pressing him. Mr. Malfoy will be here soon. I hear both he and his son have had their disagreements with you. Perhaps it's best they not interact. Before Dumbledore could finish, the door was pushed open, and Lucius Malfoy entered with a sullen face. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. Do you know the password? I don't think I had time to tell you. Gryffindor. What a stupid password. I didn't need to be told, Lucius replied, sweeping his gaze over the room until it landed on Dylan. His eyes narrowed. Why is this brat here? Vera frowned. He's one of Harry's friends and an excellent student at Hogwarts. He might know something about the chamber, so I asked the headmaster to call him. Lucius sneered at Vera. Look who it is, an underling of the head of the Auror office. Do you think you have any right to interfere? Vera's frown deepened, but she remembered her superior's instructions and said nothing. Dumbledore laughed aloud. Rufus is an experienced and outstanding wizard. As head of the Auror office, he has resolved many problems caused by dark wizards. Perhaps Vera will inherit his mantle one day. Dream on, Lucius scoffed. Even an office head is more than some little girl like you could handle. His gaze slid to Harry, a sharp glint in his eyes. Dylan pursed his lips. Malfoy. What did you call me? Lucius snapped. You insolent boy. Dylan remained unruffled. What I meant was, Mr. Malfoy, you shouldn't always hold such prejudice against everyone. Do you remember Slytherin's Code of Conduct, Article 39? Respect those who love us, protect those we love. Your behavior is not that of a gentleman, Lucius said loftily. Dylan blinked. So you think I would love you, or that you would love me? Lucius snorted. Harry couldn't help but laugh. Lucius glared at him. Dylan shrugged. You are truly an eloquent gentleman. Lucius felt his temper spike. A vein throbbed at his temple. He drew a deep breath and tried to regain his composure. Of course, being summoned so early never meant anything good. Dylan, don't speak to your elders that way. Dumbledore cut in, laughing freely. Ha! Dylan looked at Dumbledore with innocent eyes. Laughing so loudly, did the headmaster imagine it made his point stronger? Lucius clenched his fist, then slowly released it, forcing his expression back to hauteur. A new Dark Lord is rising, Dumbledore. I heard he even appeared in Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets last night, and you, how could you have not noticed? Yes. Well, at that time I was locked out of Hogwarts by the transfer order you brought, Lucius finished, but Dumbledore nodded and promptly cut him off. Chapter 159. You are confident enough because you are stupid enough. Dumbledore, don't think that saying words like that will lessen your guilt. You put Hogwarts in danger. That's a fact. Lucius Malfoy's face was thunderous. Besides, Aurors have no right to send you back to Hogwarts. When I get back, I'll write to the Ministry about these reckless Aurors. They should be severely punished. Dumbledore remained calm. As far as I know, Vera is the Auror captain the Ministry sent. She has the right to take actions that benefit Hogwarts. But the Board of Governors has suspended you. How could an Auror do such a thing? Lucius's eyes widened. Last night, 11 governors, excluding you, contacted me. They came one after another like owls in a blizzard. Rumors are spreading. Arthur Weasley's daughter was hurt at Hogwarts, and the story about a murder at the school is already outside. They all think you're too old to serve as headmaster. They've nominated me to replace you. If I were in charge, none of this would have happened. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly. And then, Lucius's eyelid twitched. Then, I think you should understand that you are old. Dumbledore blinked. So what? Lucius was about to retort when someone at the doorway hesitated. Dylan noticed a small figure peeking in. A house elf, listening to the exchange, looked unsure whether to come in. Dumbledore continued, amused. This morning, I also received letters from the governors. They thought I ought to be invited back. Strange, Lucius. The governors seem to believe that if they refuse to expel me, you'll curse their families. Lucius's face twitched. His pallor grew worse, until he looked almost corpse-white, fury the only color left in his eyes. He avoided the subject. What? How could you say such a thing? Vera said sharply, shocked. That has nothing to do with you, Mr. Malfoy. What evidence do you have to accuse me of that? Lucius glared at Vera. A person of Muggle blood, how dare you question my loyalty to this school? Dylan stepped in. You're wrong about that, Uncle Mummy. What did you call me? Lucius snapped. What? Your face is as white as a mummy's, so I just... Dylan blinked. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Is it impolite? Stop feigning innocence. It's disgusting. Lucius's voice dropped low and ugly. Dumbledore frowned for the first time. Lucius, you cannot speak to a student like that. Sir, I apologize if I offended you, Lucius said quickly. It's just that he reminds me of a dog from my village, friendly, unafraid of strangers. Dumbledore arched an eyebrow in disbelief and looked at Dylan. He had heard comments from Professor Snape about this boy's barbed tongue, but seeing it in action was another matter. You little... Lucius's composure finally cracked. He could no longer maintain his veneer of civility. The cheery, childish mask had dropped. The contempt in his eyes was obvious. Dylan cocked his head. Sir, is there something on your nose? An ant's leg sticking out? Lucius snatched a small mirror and peered at his face, looking left and right. Finding nothing, he scowled. Oh, sorry. I must have been mistaken. You just give me this impression of cunning that can't quite figure things out. For a moment, I thought something was crawling in your nose. A strangled laugh escaped Lucius, half fury, half incredulity. The house elf at the doorway, unable to decide whether to come in, froze on the spot after hearing Dylan's words. Vera, too, hadn't expected the polite-looking student to be so sharp. The jabs weren't overtly vile, but they cut deep. Harry, standing to the side, covered his mouth and snickered. Dylan rarely cursed, but when he spoke, he could infuriate people to the bone. Even Malfoy usually avoided provoking him. Now it seemed his father might follow in his son's footsteps. You seem very angry. It's terrifying, like a monster. When you're alone, you must walk on all fours, right? Dylan continued, merciless. Lucius drew a breath and forced a sneer, trying to rein in his fury. This mudblood was clearly trying to provoke him, just like in that bookshop before, but he would not stoop to match a mudblood's filth. He shot a disdainful look at Dylan, then turned back to Dumbledore. There's no need for him to stay and hear what I have to say, is there? Dumbledore clicked his tongue and raised an eyebrow. Of course. I've already informed him. Fortunately, he knows nothing about the Chamber of Secrets. He turned to Dylan. Child, go back to the dormitory. Tell everyone not to worry. The situation is being handled. Dylan inclined his head, his gaze lingering on the wand in Dumbledore's hand, the Elder Wand. He had a sudden, irreverent urge to pry it open and examine its core. Oh, right. Come see me in my office tonight. Dylan paused a beat. Okay, Headmaster. Vera nodded to Dylan. Dylan bowed politely and left. As he stepped out, he finally saw Dobby in full. The house elf shrank back a little, both fearful and admiring. Dylan gave a friendly smile. If you ever want a new master, come find me. I'll curse anyone who bullies you or use magic to fight for you. Dobby looked stunned and made no reply. Don't even think about taking my servant. Lucius snapped from the office, but Dylan didn't bother answering. He waved and left. Back in the Gryffindor common room, Ginny and the others were still in the hospital wing under Madame Pomfrey's watch. Hermione had recovered and was chatting with Neville. Hey, Dylan, she called. Dylan nodded. Good to see you're looking well. Hermione leaned forward. Were you called to Dumbledore's office? Was Harry there too? Yes, Dylan said. They were discussing the headmaster's temporary suspension, so I came back. Hermione's face clouded. I hope Professor Dumbledore remains our headmaster, Dylan smiled. Don't worry, he will. Are you feeling all right now? Hermione shook her head. Yes, but Professor Snape's restorative potion was horridly bitter. One girl who woke up with me threw up immediately. Dylan arched an eyebrow. In front of Snape? Hermione stifled a smile. Yes, Snape was so angry he stormed out. It didn't seem that bitter to me, though. Dylan clicked his tongue. Maybe the potion you drank was one I brewed. Hermione blinked. I knew it. No wonder Snape looked so dark. Good to see you're okay. Harry and Ron were worried. Ginny? Neville says she's fine. The Weasley brothers went to sit with her. Dylan pouted. That won't let Ginny rest properly. Madame Pomfrey won't allow them near her, so she'll be fine, Hermione said. You wait for Harry. He'll be back soon. I'll head up to the dormitory. Neville started to follow, but Dylan waved him off. I'm going to study. You do whatever you must. Review. The finals will probably be postponed. Neville leapt. Right, I need to go study. Hermione faltered. Dylan, have you learned anything new while I was petrified? Lots, Neville muttered, then added, and most of it's hard. Hermione looked worried. They'll find alternate exam arrangements for students in special circumstances, won't they? We missed a lot. Dylan gestured to reassure her, but Hermione looked more distressed than before. Wait for Harry. He's been studying hard. If you want to catch up, study with him. She opened her mouth, then closed it, just nodding. She had wanted to ask Dylan to study with her, but his earlier comment had shut that down. Reluctantly, she gathered the textbooks she'd missed. Dylan escorted Neville a short way and then slipped into his trunk room at the edge of the forest. He'd been summoned by Dumbledore, but Dumbledore's tone didn't seem genuinely suspicious. Dylan planned to use the time to examine Tom Riddle's diary. Who keeps a diary? Little Voldemort must have written shocking things and then turned the diary into a Horcrux to hide the truth. After leaving food for Norberta and Coleball, Dylan entered the little house attached to his private, self-sustaining space. One advantage of that ecosystem was a constant supply of prey for anything he threw in. Norberta and Coleball, being his pets, treated arrivals as meals, but because he fed them regularly, they barely bothered with the forest creatures. He'd have to go to Diagon Alley soon to sign for his house and exchange galleons to expand the space. If he put a basilisk in there, the current area would be far too small for breeding larger creatures. Before entering the house, he'd already changed into his gear. The black cloak and mask hid his face entirely. The diary lay in a corner amid scattered clutter. Having endured several Avada Kedavras from Dylan earlier, the diary had lost whatever connection it had to Ginny and seemed weakened. Dylan smirked and raised his wand. A flash of light cracked the roof open. A skylight tore into the night above. A cry from the nearby forest followed, and small animals were hurled by the wind into the house, flapping wildly. Dylan tapped his wand. Silver ribbons of light unfurled from the animals and flowed into the diary. As life force poured in, the diary stiffened. Its cover and pages seemed harder. It drank, then settled silently, subdued. Dylan's voice was cold. So, after becoming a Horcrux and immune to the killing curse, you've acquired a taste for being hit by Avada Kedavra? The diary trembled. A blurred outline emerged from the pages, shaping into a familiar form. A pale face, combed dark hair, high nose, cold eyes. Tom Riddle. The spectral figure floated in the corner, resentment carved into his features. I don't remember you from the wizarding world, he said. Dylan gave a flat laugh. Call me Karthus, fool of the world, guide between life and death. I answered the echo of the scorned and found you. Tom bristled. You, do you know who I am? What power I have? How dare you judge me? You're confident because you're foolish, Dylan said. A candle that refuses to die because it fears a beautiful end. Do you think you can escape death? He stepped closer. The heavy sound of his boots on the wooden floor was like a hammer striking Tom's pride. Don't try to probe your surroundings. This is my domain. You're in my hands. You won't escape. Tom's face went pale. You can sense my magic? Dylan's voice took on a strange rasp thanks to a voice-changing charm. This is my world of death. The moment your slit-like eyes dart left and right, I know what you intend. He withdrew his wand from his sleeve. Tom screamed. His outward-reaching spiritual power was snuffed by an inexplicable force. It was Dylan's space control, an ability that had cost him a fortune to activate. Even at level 1, it let him detect and crush spiritual fluctuations within his space. What kind of spell is this? Tom whispered, white-faced. If not for the Horcrux's protection, he felt his soul might have been scattered. "Foolish mortal," Tom spat, trying to mask his fear. "Do you have time to bargain with death?" Dylan raised his wand and made the diary float up. "Don't struggle. I'm writing your name into my black grimoire. Your life song won't end. You'll be my prime experimental subject." He outlined his plans in a cold, clinical voice. Use a bronze probe soaked in acromantula venom to create a modified magic spectrum. Capture Inferi, preferably werewolves or vampires, and test resonance points between Horcrux energy and dark creatures. Before that, he would experiment with Tom's mental contamination. If he could get another troll and use basilisk fangs to destroy part of the diary, taking the remaining pages, he might crack the grafted consciousness experiment. These were the lines of research Dylan longed to pursue: pseudo-Horcrux mass production, reverse Horcruxes, parasitic metamorphosis. The plans were ambitious and forbidden. Many preparations remained. But for now, he'd begin with the simplest thing. He cast his eyes on the diary, and then to the mastery task shimmering in his mind. Spell to be mastered: Avada Kedavra. Spell trait to be unlocked: Corridor of the Dead. Mastery task unlocked: In your presence, death is absolutely fair. Cast the Killing Curse 444 times on the target to unlock this trait and complete spell mastery. Dylan didn't hesitate. He'd already unlocked a trait for Avada Kedavra, Luo Yifen Tian, that let him open a destructive domain for 4 seconds. Each Killing Curse he cast counted double. 444 would be halved. It would be easy. "Pain is the developer of the soul, Tom," Dylan murmured, the voice alterer making it sound like rusted gears grinding. He raised his wand. The scales on his mask gleamed with a morbid light. Avada Kedavra. Evil power erupted in the room. The light at the wand's tip was at once pure as dawn and subtly malevolent, an impossible marriage of holiness and malice. Tom's cruel smile froze. "What spell are you using?" "What kind of spell is that?" Dylan mocked silently. "Wand beautification. For only 100 galleons, the moment Avada Kedavra is cast, it turns into a holy sword that cleaves through hell. Avada Kedavra? No, Avada Redemption. For only 100 galleons, let the Killing Curse unleash a great archangel's judgment cannon." Merlin's beard. He forced the thought away, leveled his wand at Tom's diary, and let the incantation fly. Holy and profane light met in the air, sparking and snapping toward the book. The Killing Curse struck the diary and it shuddered as if prey hit by a great blow. The casing's runes dimmed and cracked, the paper hissed as though singed, and wisps of smoke curled from the edges. Tom Riddle's soul body convulsed, his features twisting with pain. A ghostly white light pierced him, and he opened his mouth in a strangled scream. Centered on Dylan, a domain expanded. The energy of the Avada Kedavra, suffused with a holy radiance, made Dylan seem godlike. That energy surged at the diary. The diary had barely withstood the Killing Curse when the domain's force hit it. Its edges blackened and curled. "What? How can you use the Killing Curse like that?" Tom's soul body cracked further, fissures running across it as the whole thing wobbled on the brink of collapse, terror in his eyes. He had always thought the Killing Curse an extension of his will. Nobody in the wizarding world could know it better than he. Yet this newcomer not only cast unrecognizable spells, he seemed to command the Killing Curse more profoundly than Tom himself. This domain of death energy. Though racked with pain, Tom's curiosity flared. How could Dylan wield death like that? "Heh," Dylan said, amused. "It's simple, because death is in my hand." He cast again. Avada Kedavra. A second blinding white jet lashed out. "Stop! How dare you!" Tom screamed. The cry was almost enough to pierce the little shack's wards. The diary was blasted across the room and tumbled several times before coming to rest. Its cover hung half off, pages charred black. The domain's energy tightened, frying the book like fat in a pan. Dylan raised his wand for a third time. A holy beam stabbed out and the diary began to come apart. Tom's soul body grew papery, near dissolution. Only then did Dylan stop, letting the domain continue to batter the diary. He slapped the wand again and summoned the roaches and spiders that skittered in the breeding pens. The little creatures rose, helpless, above the diary. Before they could react, a crushing force snapped their exoskeletons. Simultaneously, the skylight burst open and small wild animals from the forbidden forest were flung in. Dylan drew their life force out and poured it into the diary. The blackened cover mended, The charred pages faded back to clean white, and Tom's form re-solidified. "You," Riddle gasped. He didn't understand. This man kept hitting him with the killing curse and then replenishing the diary's life. He weakened Tom until he could barely form a human face, then patched him up again, time and again. Each strike ripped more sanity from him. Only when Dylan noticed the forest creatures dwindling did he relent. It hadn't been 444 curses. Dylan had decided not to risk an irreparable Horcrux rupture. He could have ended it faster with a few devastating spells, but he didn't know whether a Horcrux, while invulnerable to outright death, might still be fatally damaged by hundreds of killing curses at once without restoration. Safer to do half the work himself, 222 curses, and let the domain finish the rest. After dozens upon dozens of strikes, Tom was too weak to sustain his human guise. He had screamed himself hoarse. Across the open diary, a single line of writing crawled into being. "You pervert," Dylan smiled. "Pervert? It seems your limited understanding can't grasp what death has granted me." He tapped the wand. The diary trembled. The holy blast Tom had expected did not immediately fire. Instead, Dylan shoved the book into a corner and sealed the area with a rotation of his wand, cutting Tom off from any escape or spying. "First round of experiments. Let's use the basilisk or Lockhart," he said, dusting off his robes that weren't really dusty. He didn't want to give the sly, dangerous Riddle any opportunity. Dylan stepped out of the shack and walked to the small storeroom behind it. It was a cramped place Dylan had conjured to hold odds and ends. Judging by the rough boards and rusty knob, the owner had clearly put little care into it. He pushed the door open with his wand. Stale air spilled out. The wood had been scavenged from Hagrid's discarded piles, the room still holding the faint smell of the forbidden forest. Backlit and dim, the storeroom smelled damp and a little rotten. Crouched in the corner was Gilderoy Lockhart, but not the smug, best-selling author Dylan remembered. Shackled by sleep and the night's effects, Lockhart was disheveled and hollow-eyed, slumped with limbs splayed as if someone had torn him apart. Dylan regarded him with distaste. "Maybe I should have grabbed him before his own backfired charm hit," he muttered, but then thought better of it. Lockhart's specialty was memory charms. Nothing useful. Keeping him dazed might be preferable. Dylan checked his watch. He had to eat. News of Dumbledore's return would be spreading. He needed to be seen sometimes. If someone came looking for him and couldn't find him, and then learned about the suitcase, trouble could follow. He summoned a few slices of bread and dropped them in front of Lockhart. There was no move. Dylan narrowed his eyes and probed with legitimacy. The man truly had become vacant, not pretending. Strange, even after a spell backlash, he should still behave normally. Dylan plucked the lockpick of control from his repertoire and slipped Imperio onto Lockhart to make him eat. He scoured him clean with Scourgify, turned a small table into a makeshift bed, and controlled Lockhart into it. Just before he released control, Dylan frowned. Lockhart hadn't relieved himself. The place was miraculously clean. Dylan issued a final low Imperio suggestion. Go outside when you need to. The forest would do. Satisfied, he left the storeroom and sent mindless instructions to Coalball and the others not to let goblins or Cornish pixies interfere with his experimental subject. He tossed 2 pieces of meat to the basilisk, then exited the suitcase space. Emerging, he found Harry and Ron in the grounds. "Ron, back so soon?" Dylan raised an eyebrow. Ron nodded. "Ginny's fine now. I wasn't hurt much, so I'm not staying in the hospital wing." Neville added, "Madame Pomfrey said he was too much trouble, always talking, so she kicked him out." "Hey!" Ron protested. Dylan turned to Harry. "Is the matter all resolved?" Harry pursed his lips. "Not really. Malfoy insists Dumbledore didn't find the real culprit and denies Voldemort organized the attacks. He blamed it on some guy named Carthus. Even when Dumbledore pressed him about things from Voldemort's school days, Malfoy accused Dumbledore of negligence instead." Dylan blinked. "And the outcome?" "There was none. Malfoy spat at Dumbledore, but he didn't lose his position." Ron's voice dropped. "Just listening to it, he's as annoying as his son." "That explains the family resemblance," Dylan said dryly. Harry flashed a grin. "Dylan, did you goad Malfoy on purpose?" Dylan shrugged. "Why would you think that?" Harry's smile widened. "After you left, Lucius had a go at Dumbledore and got slapped down. You told him a notebook was Ginny's other diary and tossed it to Dobby. Dobby was free again because you used the destroyed diary, remember? Dylan's face reddened faintly. He had forgotten that, and had even said Lucius could come to him after he was freed. I forgot about that, he admitted. Harry looked pleased. So you did it on purpose. Dylan allowed a half lie. Maybe I wanted to irritate Lucius a bit. They headed toward the Great Hall. Hermione was there waiting for dinner and walked up. Hey, Hermione, how are you? Ron asked eagerly. Hermione's gaze went straight to Dylan. I feel fine. Dylan's potion tasted better than Professor Snape's. Thank you for saving me from Snape's recovery draught. Dylan waved his hand dismissively. Don't tell Snape that. It might not go down well. He added, conversationally, I just mix a little honey and milk into the mandrake paste. It doesn't change the potion's effect, only the taste. Neville tugged at his sleeve, and before Dylan could say more, a clipped, icy voice came from behind. No wonder your potions have the cloying sweetness of cheap desserts. Are you planning to hang up your robes and open a candy stall in Diagon Alley? Dylan stiffened. A black-robed figure floated into view. Professor Snape, pale and severe, lips a thin line. Harry, Hermione, and the others exchanged looks and, with a silent agreement, began to drift away. There are pumpkin pasties, Ron murmured, and led the retreat. Dylan watched them go as Snape fixed him with a look. When did you add honey to that potion? Why didn't I notice? Dylan forced a laugh and gestured to the mandrake paste. I mixed it in with the mandrake. You know how strong that smell is. A little honey won't cut through it, and I didn't use much. Snape's eyes narrowed. He let out a cold snort and swept into the great hall with a dramatic swish of black fabric. Dylan wiped non-existent sweat from his forehead and hurried after him.